All right.
That's terrible. That's terrible. Oh, you heard that?
Okay, so I taught middle school. I hear everything, but I don't respond to everything.
It is a thing was allowed to kill all the street dogs.
Dang.
And
I mean, I'm not a
so
big fan
they
of
don't
dogs.
look like they want to street dogs. So it is like people is protesting for that.
For street dogs?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of dogs. I feel like to make it a law, to kill them, I don't know that I'm on board with that.
So have you ever been in a country with stray dogs, right? And cats?
I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, no.
But to kill them all, sometimes it comes with deals.
You gotta start somewhere.
They're everywhere. It is terrible.
Yeah.
But
Cats are like that in North Africa. It's like everywhere. Cats are everywhere. All right.
Take care. You're right. And what's your name?
really cool. Real food. Yeah.
So as we're waiting for some of our brothers and sisters to come into the room, I did want to share that I made a website for us that has all the PowerPoints, and I'll be adding videos to that as well. So if you use the QR code, you can scan it and you can see it on your phone. There's also a link there that if you go to that link, you can get. Oh, it didn't? Oh. Okay, let me look. Let me double check. More important, there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait, just you wait.
Yeah, it says class not found when I click on the link. But they said that-
I wonder if I didn't make it live. Let me see if I have to make it live.
But the classroom
Oh, you sent us an email?
Yeah,
Yes.
You are called.
I went to that. After this, I will send them to them. Yes. So.
I want to You can open it either.
We have got the shape.
Yeah.
Okay, well, at the break, I'll just double check it. I'm looking at it now, and I see it. I just want to make sure. It's asking me to log in to my Google account. So it says no class found. I will. Sorry, my last class. So that's on purpose. Now, the other thing is that I have a tentative date for a winter. Well, you say all right now, but until you get a date. So I looked at most of the school calendars, and I also looked at the availability of this space. And they have the wonderful 2 days of the 27th and 28th of December. So, yes.
As an immigrant, I go to my country.
Do you know how many times I've heard that already? Like, I'm out of the country. You're gonna be on your own. So it was just a tentative date to see, to put something out there. So our school calendars are packed.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe an MEA weekend kind of thing, but other people go to the mall on.
Priority.
My district won't, I don't think they will have problem as some any other day.
Okay.
Yeah, even during the, you know, during the school week, it's fine, you know, if you.
Oh,
yeah,
We
yeah.
don't have problem.
Thanks for looking into it.
Yeah, 'cause
But
this
we
is
usually say
PD.
professional development type thing.
Okay.
Potentially,
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have
professional.
problem with-
Okay, I can develop professionals.
Do all of that, right?
All right, cool. Yeah, so I tried to find times that folks, wouldn't have to take, whatever. So, all right, so I'll put out a doodle or something like that, and we'll see. Are you familiar with doodle? So, okay, cool. Yeah, I feel hip.
Yeah.
But I did have to delete my Snapchat, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. Yes, Slap. You might have Slap, the little ghost.
No one has.
That's not.
Oh, Snapchat. That's what. Okay. No.
Well, and now it's like, you asking for my number, when they meet, they want to keep in touch. It's like, oh, he didn't ask me for my Snapchat.
Yeah, right.
That number anymore. It's like, no, my Snapchat. Or it's the opposite. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Like, so there's that. So today's agenda is like our other agendas. It has been pretty packed. I want to say I want to hit some important concepts because there's some not only so when I was the cultural coordinator at Anoka County, it was one of the oddest jobs that I had because it was my job. I was being paid to bite the hand that fed me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, right? So I always had to walk this fine line between holding people accountable and trying to keep my job at the same time. And while not trying to infight with the people that I'm working with, because they thrust us into this small pool with finite resources, and we have this monumental task to do. And so sometimes it can be easy to. So my wife asked me, because I will tell you, our marriage is great. It's a perfect marriage, but we're imperfect people, right? So the marriage is fine, but sometimes we have problems. She and I have problems. Right? So we're talking, and she was like, why do we engage each other like this? Because we don't engage other people like that. And it occurred to me it's because we're close to one another. Like all these other people are kind of far, we can distance ourselves. And the same thing sometimes happens even in our workspaces, right? I don't believe in work husbands and work wives, but you'll hear people use that kind of language. But I think the same dynamic happens. Brothers and sisters engage each other way differently than they do with the general public. And so we have to be mindful of that stuff. So one of the things that I've been trying to work on is recognizing that context is everything, right? So context is everything. And for many of you, you may not know, I'm 47 years old. I'll be 48 in October. I am so excited about that because the alternative sucks. So, but in that time, I'm walking a line now, right? So, it's funny. Yeah, I'll tell it because it's funny. So I have a 4-year-old, and I have my feet up on the coffee table because I can. I'm grown. Right? So it's one of the things that grown folks can do. You can have your ice cream in the morning. You can, whatever. So I have my feet up, and my daughter looked at my big toe. She said, "What is that?" So I have a callus on my big toe. I don't know if anybody else has that. You probably have better, feet hygiene than I do, or whatever. But I got a little callus on my big toe. And she asked what that was. And I said, it's a callus. So, she's 4. She doesn't know what a callus. So I got to go through all this stuff and explain, blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, so she looked at me, she said, "So you're old." I said, "Yeah." I said, and one day you will have a callus on your foot too, because you will be old like me, right? So she's a 4-year-old. But that really struck me because I'm thinking about myself and how I'm engaging in the world. And my age has produced calluses even on my soul, right? And so I have to stave off cynicism. One of my biggest enemies right now is cynicism. And cynicism is that belief that it's almost like a sarcasm kind of feeling about the world. Like someone will say, "Good morning," and you go, "Yeah, right, good morning," right? Like yeah, really, it's a good morning, So I'm fighting off this negative pessimism. And and I said this earlier, that one of the drugs that we use to kind of get over stuff is this idea of hope, right? I'm at a point where I'm almost out of hope. I'm almost out of hope, which is why it's important for me to realize what our history has demonstrated for us, right? So that American history of education stuff is important, because if I don't recognize that, then I will lose hope. Because I'll think that all this stuff is about me and it's happened to me, and nobody's gone through what I've gone through before. And they have. And they made it because I'm here, right? So I'm wrestling against this cynicism stuff, this pessimistic way of looking at the world. And so I've come to a point where I now consider myself to be a realist. I am going to deal with what is at my hands and arm's length, and I'm going to do well with that. So So recognizing that, I had to understand this idea that context is everything. And so when we start talking about context, what is context? So how might you define or how might you talk about context?
The environment is around us.
So the environment that's around you,
reality.
the reality, the experience. All right, so I want to go back to this environment because that's a big word, right? It can mean a number of different things. So when you say the environment, what's coming up for you?
Like this environment, this context.
So which context?
The room, the people, even the way I feel, the way I perceive everybody, weather. What? Weather. The weather. Yeah. That to me is context.
All right, cool. So when we start talking about this context, it is all those things that you talked about. But there are three primary things that I want us to think about in terms of context. That it is about time, space, and geography. Right? Time, space, and geography. What is the city that we're in right now? Edina. Edina. What state are we in? Minnesota. What does that mean that we are in Minnesota? Minnesota.
What does that mean?
What does that mean that we're in Minnesota?
So we live here, we go to school here, we work here, our family.
Our families are here, we live here, we work here.
It's here. The dynamics of this state compared to other states.
What's the dynamics specifically of this state and where we currently are? What's that context? What's the overall context of that? Where are we?
In the north.
In a Scandinavian.
Oh, it is a Scandinavian. That's interesting.
No, it's multicultural more, I think, you know. But I don't know. North.
Yeah, please.
Midwest.
Dakota homeland.
It is Dakota homeland that was stolen. If we don't start with that as the context, everything else doesn't make sense at all, right? If we don't start there as the context, that we are on Dakota stolen land. So when we talk about this idea of context, it is about time, it is about space, and it is about geography. So I do this thing with, we're just going to do the continental U.S. Because I'm not good at the, I can do Africa. I know Africa.
Is that California and Texas?
Yeah.
That's California, Texas, and a part of Mexico. Like, part of Mexico. Is that better? Louisiana. So at any rate, I'm going to use that as my example. So, well, I can use this. So, I always, so like, South America is pretty good, but then like Central America is like really difficult. And actually, to be quite honest, I think South America is more like that because we're more west than we are, right? So,
Another interesting thing, just that kind of came to my mind. In school here in the United States, when they teach geography, in reference to America, they say it's North America and South America. They don't specify Central America. And of course, I am from Central America, so. But I learned North, Central, and South, and everywhere else in the world, because I've asked other people, and they've learned it's North, Central, and South. But in the United States, they teach kids it's North and South.
Yeah, they also teach that that slaves were workers.
Yeah.
They were workers, right? Yeah. So no, you better believe it. You believe it? Oh, sweet. Okay, can I tell a story about belief? So I'm in Belize. So it was my first time in Belize, and I'm a dumb American, right? So as woke as I am now, I wasn't woke like that. In fact, I'm in Belize, and we're in a foreign country, right? So we're on this cruise ship, and cruise ships is weird colonial zoos, right? It's the bizarrest little thing. Anyway, so we got a port, so we're in Belize, and so I'm the kind of cat that there's the tour, and then there's like the people's tour, right? So I want to do what the people do. I want to find out what the people do. So I'm not getting my hair braided, which is a weird thing because they wouldn't do that. People wouldn't do that here, but they do it in a foreign country where they don't even know where the combs and the light, whatever. So that I'm in Belize, and I see black people, and I'm like, oh snap, like black people, and so I see this dude. Now it's 100 and something degrees, right? And this dude has on this what we call where I come from, a fit, F-I-T. He had this fit on. So he had this jean jacket. Yeah. He had matching jean pants. It is important that they're the same jean, right? So he had that. He had a Chicago Bulls shirt on. He had 2 cornrows, pretty hair. Oh, his hair was, we call that good hair. I don't know if y'all have, but he had pretty hair and very, very dark skinned brown brother. And I'm watching him, and I'm like, how is he in this foreign country dressing like people like my cousins and them, right? So finally I get my courage up and I walk over to him and I said, brother, that's a nice outfit. He had Jordans on too, right? And I was like, that's a nice outfit. So because a lot of the Belizeans were dressed just like, shorts and a loose cotton shirt or whatever or whatnot. And so I said, brother, where'd you get that outfit? He was like, he named some store, and I was like, where is that? He said, Chicago. I'm floored. I'm like, what? He was like, yeah, I got a cousin in Chicago. I go to Chicago every so often, and And it just like, it never occurred to me that like people from Central America would like go to Chicago, right? So I'm like, oh. And so we exchanged numbers and that kind of stuff. We did the whole black people hand thing. But I was just floored. I was like, oh, you better believe it. So, and that was his thing. He said, you better believe it. And I was like,
he did that because you were American.
I'm sure Belizeans don't do that to each other. No. So actually just made a fool of me. One thing that related but not related, do you know Anthony Galloway that was here?
I do, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Because his family is very involved in Belize. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so that was cool. I didn't know you knew him, but now I know you do. Okay, cool.
And he's from Chicago, so that was my cousin who had that fit on.
I love it when my jokes is like, on me, right? So context is important, right? So I thought it was interesting that Dr. Hammersmith started talking about this idea of IQ, right? And here is a question that I want us to think about as we engage as cultural liaisons and interpreters with the dominant society, because we have to challenge them to think. If there's nothing else that I do, I think my biggest job is to encourage thought, because there are so many systems and people who don't want folks thinking, right? So to encourage thought. So here is this thing called IQ, which I think is interesting. Intelligence quotients, right? So how much or how do people use IQ? What's it supposed to do? Tell you how smart you are. What else? To segregate. So it's used as a tool to segregate, but it's supposed to tell you how smart you are, right? Or measure the smartness of an individual. So I think that's very interesting that we have this tool that measures the smartness of an individual. So IQ. So in Minnesota, which we're kind of over here. This is kind of Wisconsin, but you get the idea. Right? So if I'm in Red Wing and I'm a farmer in Goodhue County, right? I'm a farmer in Goodhue County. Are there certain things that I need to know being on that farm?
Yeah.
What are kinds of things? Anybody been around agriculture? Not just necessarily in Goodhue County, but agriculture in general. On a farm, around farms, garden. Okay. So what kinds of things might a farmer need to know to be successful?
The weather.
Okay. So the weather, soil conditions, water sources, how to deal with pests, right? So if you have an organic farm versus kind of a Monsanto run, they changed their name, by the way, but we'll talk about that too. Chemicals, all this kind of stuff. So I have to have this body of knowledge to be successful on that farm, right? So let's say I take that farmer and I drop that farmer off in New York City, in downtown Manhattan. What might those New Yorkers say or suggest about the farmer?
The way he dresses right away would be an issue.
All right, so they might have an issue with how he dresses right away. They'll assume that he's stupid. That's what? That his accent is inappropriate for their environment. What's that? That he's ignorant, that he's backwards, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, let's also say, what if we took a New Yorker and we put him on the farm in Red Wing, Minnesota? The exact same thing reversed. So when we talk about this concept of IQ, what are we talking about? IQ for what? Right? So our families and our students know how to do things in different contexts. Now, here is a challenge. Now, I understand some other things about IQ, and I'll address those too. But can the farmer adapt to life in New York? Yes, he can. All things considered, he can adapt to that, right? Can the New Yorker adapt to life on the farm? No, he can't, right? All things considered, he can adapt. What is the space between my arrival and my adaptation? What is that called? Or what is that space that should be provided? Education, and that takes time. So from my arrival to my adaptation, I need time to do that, right? So something that Europeans, particularly, I thought was interesting. You said we're in the Scandinavian land.
Not land, but
Way of thinking, right? Yeah, way of thinking. The interesting thing is, most of the Scandinavians did not come here speaking English, right? But over time, they what? They learn how to do that. Do you think Scandinavians came here and just said, you know what, we're going to disperse ourselves among all the people of the land? No, they created small communities where they could feel safe, they could get their belonging, they could make their connections. So when we talk about IQ, we have to ask IQ for what? Because that will drive us back to contextual questions, right? Now, there are some mental capacity, there are some people who have mental capacities that how they adapt to these different contexts is limited by their intellectual capacity. So I will suggest that. But I also will say that if we understand context, then we can actually get people what they need. So there is, in Anoka County, there's a program called RISE. And RISE is for adults with developed disabilities, right? Developmental disabilities. And they are masters at what they're able to do.
And it's funny how some things we call a curse, but can be a blessing in the right context, right? So if I have someone who is OCD or autistic in terms of being lower on the spectrum, where they have to do things ritually, then having those folks in the mailroom makes sense, right? Because that's a ritualistic kind of thing. And so this idea of IQ for what? So context is important. And so as we even look at, making these kinds of leaps, this is a relatively short distance between New York and Minnesota compared to going to Ethiopia or Somalia and coming into this country, which means we need more what? Because we have more distance, we need more time, right? Or coming from Central America or South America, we just need more time. And so part of our job is to recognize and tell the system, give these folks some time, right?
And resources.
And resources, right? Because that creates authentic hope as opposed to the fake hope that says, you can do anything you want, right? One of the things I was very adamant about with my students was sharing with them that you can't be anything you want to be. You can be anything that you're willing to work towards, right? So you put that effort in, and with a little bit of luck, it changes things too, right? So I think that's important. So when we talk about this idea of context, we have to recognize that where people grow up, how they develop, the government systems that they've been under is extremely important. And so the other part that I wanted to get to with your family map was this idea of culture. So what is culture? And I would like to offer you that culture is contextual as well, right? So it's based on the context. It's based on time, it's based on space, and it's based on geography, right? Yes.
Can I add something to this? It's not just where they come from, it's the situation they have here, their context here.
Oh, yeah.
Because it could be a family from Mexico in a very different situation, and that other one, and they want to measure them the same.
Yeah.
It's like, why they're doing this and they're doing so well, and it's not. It's because they come from completely different realities, and their reality here is very different. Their context here, it's very different.
And the context here is very different, and it is hostile, which I find interesting because the big green lady in the New York Harbor says something totally different than how people try to do things here.
And another thing is like about talking about America also. They think because we speak Spanish, we're all the same. And because we're all Latinos and we're all Hispanics and we're more than 20 countries with different situations, with different cultures. We have some common things, of course. We have the language, but even our language is different.
Yeah.
And we have different connotations too.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find percentages for them. It's like, but also you cannot blame if you don't know. That's why we have to educate our teachers to our staff.
Yeah, we're going to get to that kind of stuff in this right versus effective thing in just a second, because we also have to recognize that it's easy to put people in simple categories, right? And I want my life to be easy. I was in a Starbucks in Blaine, so I'm sitting here and this guy keeps looking at me, and I'm like, I'm trying to check my own stuff because, I'm like, why are you looking at me? Because where I come from, that means something, right? So he comes over. He's on his way out. He comes over to me. He said, I know you saw me looking at you. And I was like, yeah, I did. He was like, are you Idris Elba? And in my best American accent, I said, why, yes, I am. He was like, really? I was like, yes, I'm Idris. He was like, no, you're not. No, you're not. And then he walked away. But I was just like, really? Like, the only thing Idris and Elba and I have in common is that we're, extremely attractive. Like, there's not a whole lot of stuff. And I told him, I said, He said, do you get that a lot? I said, no, not so much that. I said, I usually get The Rock. You know, people confuse me with The Rock. And, no, but it's that same monolithic thing, right? So like all these people are the same. So context is important. So I just want to talk a little bit about this idea of culture. And many of you have seen the iceberg theory of culture, which says that there's, you know, the tip of the iceberg, and it's 10 to 20%, and this is 90%, blah, 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 blah. Love it. It served us well, great stuff. But I need something that's a bit more organic and transcendent. And so when thinking about that, what I started thinking about was these agricultural models that we can sometimes use, right? And so what I like to call this is the carrot of culture. And so the most valued part that most of us in our society use, the most valued part of the carrot is which part? Is the root, right? So if you were my grandmother, you would call it the root. That's what she would call it, right? So the root of culture. And what would we call this top part? What would you call that? The greens? Okay. So we'll call it the greens. So when we talk about this, I like to recognize that there is a symbiotic relationship between these two parts. So the greens and the root are connected, and they need each other to survive, right? So what does the root do for the greens? It feeds it, right? It takes in nutrients from the ground, takes in water from the ground, feeds it to the top. And what does the top do for the roots? Okay. So so the sun, I'll draw sun. So the sun, it creates photosynthesis, and that energy gets stored in the root of the piece. So they need each other. They're symbiotic. What would happen if they became disconnected? They would respectively die, right? Or at least not be producing at the level that they would if they were connected, right? So if we look at this carrot of culture, we know that this is a context, right? So let's call this the root of culture, values. So what are some of the deeply held values of a culture? What are some deeply held values of culture?
Faith.
So faith systems, right? What else? Tradition.
Structures,
What's that?
family structure.
Family structures, gender roles, time, right? We don't have a whole lot of time to talk about this idea of the ice versus the sun. Anyone ever heard of that theory that people from warm climates see time and see nature differently than people from colder climates, right? So ice versus the sun. So a lot of those values are in the root. And why are they deeply hidden? Why are they deeply hidden?
Because we don't wear a sign saying I'm a Christian or I'm,
Some of us do. The hijab is a pretty clear sign that somebody might be a Muslim.
But you cannot see inside everything about you.
You can't see everything about you.
And it comes from generations, and you grew up with that.
So this is not just me, but this is all the generations that I'm a part of, right? So this is because this is the important stuff. This is really important. So the root of culture is important. What we also have to recognize is that we will call the greens, or refer to the greens as artifacts. So what are the artifacts of culture?
The way I dress, the food I eat.
The way that I dress, the food that I eat.
What you can see.
More tangible things that you can see. These two things are related. They're connected. So when I see artifacts, they are a clue about someone's values. They're clues about values. So artifacts are the physical manifestation of values. So a hijab, as an example, outside of being an excellent fashion statement, it is a statement of values. Now, how people value how much they give or don't give to that, I can't say, but I do know that it's connected to these values. So what we also have to recognize is that if this is true for this carrot, can this also be true for the oak tree?
Yes.
Yes, right? Looks a little bit different. And why would it look different for the oak tree than for the carrot?
More can be seen.
So more can be seen.
It's different than the carrot.
It's different than the carrot, right? Can it also be true for the seaweed? Why can it be the same kinds of processes happen with the seaweed, but why is it different now for the seaweed, even though this is very similar?
Seaweed we cannot see.
The artifacts are different.
Because the context is different,
Yeah.
right? So when we talk about our similarities and differences, we certainly have lots of things that are very similar to us because we're human beings. But our contexts have been very different. And so this stuff starts to look a little bit different because we come from different places. Both biologically, we end up having different phenotypes, if you will, because of the geographic regions that our ancestors came from, the roots of culture, blah, blah, blah. So if I don't understand the context, then I won't understand the culture. If I don't understand the context, then the religion seems pointless to me, right? If I don't understand the context, all of these things become mysteries to me. And at the root of culture, at the root of this carrot, what is this carrot after?
Significance, belonging.
Significance, belonging, and safety, right? So these artifacts and these values are after significance, belonging, and safety. How we go about getting those things will be very different based upon our context, right? Yes.
And can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Even though we might be talking about specifically about carrots, right? But that carrot, we have two, let's talk about two in different hands. One probably received fertilizer, the other one didn't. So the outcome is going to be totally different.
The context.
Yeah, so I want to put that into perspective right now with families that are migrating, and specifically right now that we're seeing in our district are the families from Venezuela. A lot of times what we're getting is a lot of people who are higher educated.
Yep.
And so the needs are different versus having another family who is also from Venezuela migrating, which their education was different too. So with the ones that are educated, they're the ones asking the questions and we're answering. Versus the other ones that we're asking the questions and providing more resources, and their needs might be in some way above the same, but the cultures that they have are totally different.
Yes.
And so, but they come from the same, and they have two different cultures because of what they have been
The
exposed to.
socioeconomic status.
Yep, and so that economic status becomes important, all these
Yes.
other things become important. One of the things that, particularly when, so after people like relaxed, when the Hmong came into the 7-county metro, people were able to relax because they were like, okay, we know how to deal with Hmong people, sort of, right? You know, and when our Somali brothers and sisters started showing up, a lot of social service agencies said, oh, we have to translate everything in Somali. So let's just translate it in Somali, and then we can just hand this stuff out.
They think with that.
What they didn't realize was that there were some folks who they could speak the language, but they couldn't necessarily read in the language. And I think we're finding that with kind of the second wave of immigrants, that all the stuff that we did for the first wave of immigrants is not necessarily best practices for all of them. So I'm glad that we have the language lines where people can actually talk to other people.
The ignorance too with the situation going with Puerto Rico. They're like, well, so there's a lot of people who are from here that are not educated and they believe they're immigrants. They're not immigrants. And they're saying, well, they should be, some people, oh, they don't speak the language. Or do they have a social security number? They are as legal as you are.
Yep.
And they are surprised because they don't speak the language too. So there's a lot of that I think, especially for our state here in Minnesota, that we have seen the increase to. It has been like a learning lesson to know more about your own country.
Yep. So using the same model, right? So this is because this helps to explain a number of things that sometimes our neighbors forget. We talked about the fact that if we cut off the artifacts, what happens to this roof, right? But let's talk about what happens to the artifacts. So when the artifacts get disconnected from their values, what happens? Loss of identity, right? What else? What's that? A transformation, right? So the artifacts, without being connected to the root, become stereotypes, right? So you ever heard, and it's funny because TV and movies, they play off of that, right? So anyone who is south of LA, particularly if you're in East LA, right? Anyone south of LA has broken English. Anyone south of LA is part of a drug cartel, right? They take these stereotypes and then magnify them a million times and then shove them down our throats, right? So when artifacts get disconnected from their values, they become stereotypes. When these artifacts are no longer connected to the values, we have lost our culture. We've lost our culture. So what do we call this X? Because this X is important. I call this X Ellis Island. Why would I refer to this X as Ellis Island?
It's basically a jumping off point where it's like you are in America, you assimilate now, you lose your language, lose your culture, your background, and become this. They
couldn't bring all the stuff on the ships, right? And when they got to the funnel point of the immigration system at the time, some of those folks weren't educated enough to be able to spell people's names. People changed their names. They wanted to be a part of what was happening on the other side of this gate, right? I also call this X refugee camps. I call this the push and pull of immigration, whether it's documented or undocumented. I call this X the transatlantic slave trade syndrome, right? That occurred to folks where they lost their identities. Now, here is something that's very interesting, though. If I leave this carrot in my refrigerator unattended, what will start to happen again? The artifacts start to grow. So have you ever noticed great-grandparents or the first generation to come to the United States oftentimes wants to not necessarily hold on to the old ways because they need to catch up on time, to catch up with stuff. So they set aside many of the old ways. And so the next generation grows up without those old ways. And then the third generation says, wait a minute, we have all of this stuff. Where are our old ways? Let's go back and find them on Pinterest. Right? So they go back and get those old ways because this carrot is going to find those artifacts, but it just may take some time, right? And there are also folks who hold on so tightly to the old ways that they is slowing down their progress for understanding the environment that they're in. So when we think about culture, I want you to think about that. So what are the artifacts of culture? How are they connected? What roots are they connected to? So if I talk bad about someone's artifacts, if I tell them that their artifacts are dumb, what am I actually saying to them? That your values aren't worthy of being recognized, right? So for me, that's been helpful. The other thing that is helpful for me is this. As a 47-year-old, I know that I'm right. I know it. I've got resources, I've got books that support me. I've done thousands of presentations, all sorts of stuff. So I don't need to be right. At this stage in my career, I'm trying to be effective. So what that might mean is that I take things that other people wouldn't take, or I engage in ways that other people wouldn't engage because I'm trying to be effective. So we'll spend some time talking about that. And so that effectiveness is important, particularly in our schools, because we have to stave off cynicism in ourselves and encourage positivity in other people, right? So we have this balance. And so how we create the environment in our school is important, and we need team members to help us. We can't do these things. You can attempt to do it by yourself, but if you can build coalitions, you can be much more effective in doing that. And so one of the aspects of many of our schools, how many schools have a school resource officer at your school or whatnot, right? So how you interact and the coalitions that you build with those school resource officers can make all the difference of the environment that's in that school, right? One thing that I'm curious about is how many times. So I have a lot of police officer friends and chiefs and whatnot, and in confidence, we have conversations about stuff that if I tried to talk about it out loud, they would deny, and it's okay that they would deny it, right? But some of the stuff that they're frustrated about is being used as goons, as a goon squad, right? So
What does that mean?
So what is a goon? It's like a thug or a enforcer, or
The muscle.
a muscle, a bouncer, all that kind of stuff, right? So being used as bouncers, if you will. And so, and one of the examples was Starbucks, right? So I thought it was really interesting that there was a lot of focus on Starbucks and a lot of focus on the young men, but we barely scratched the surface of all of the things that were available to the officers to be able to do, right? And I don't know the specifics, but I do know this, that there are many times that I deserved tickets and didn't get them, right? Because the officers had some discretion in how we were interacting. There were times when I was in wrong places or asked to leave places, and officers could have done other things, but they chose to let me go on my own reconnaissance, right? So I want us to think about those things, that all too often people see the police as one thing, but they have a wealth of skills that they can provide. And so if you're ready, I'm ready.
I don't know if I'm ready, but.
Okay, cool. So as a point of being transparent, right? So Beth works at she's the executive director for community mediation, and one of our star police relationships with our RSO, school resource officers, is with the city of Plymouth. And so I don't want to steal your thunder, and you can do your thing, but there are different types of philosophies of policing, and that it not only extends from the chief or the city, but goes into our school settings too. And so there are different types of relationships and different types of philosophies that context, either a made-up context or a necessity of context, produces the kinds of relationships that folks have in schools. So just want to do that as a now, what is your formal positionary title in the, are you like a sergeant?
Nope, I am a school resource officer.
School resource officer. Yep. All right, cool. So I will get out of her way and
help me along if you have any questions or you want me to take it a certain way.
Cool, I will.
This is not what I normally do. I get very nervous with public speaking, but I believe in what I do enough to take this opportunity to give you guys kind of a glimpse into see what school resource officers do.
That's wonderful.
Unfortunately, the only time we really hear about school resource officers is when we end up on YouTube or the news and things, and we don't really kind of see everything else that we do. I heard a congressman, I think it was from some representative from Illinois, who said we need to remove all school resource officers from the schools, and I said that is a person who does not know what school resource officers actually do. So I'm here to speak solely what I do and what I've been able to implement in my schools and my beliefs and what I'm kind of trying to change how administration uses police officers in the roles of schools and such. So very informal. I'm going to talk really fast because I'm really nervous, but hopefully I'll get into my groove and slow down. If you ever have a question or want me to expand further on something, just go ahead and let me know. So I've been a police officer for 24 years. I've been with the school system for about 3 years now. I've worked in 2 different schools. I choose to work in middle schools because they don't quite hate us yet, as in high school. And I feel that it is such a formative time in their life where they're learning so much. And I think a role with police and authority and beliefs and changing mindsets, we're kind of more able to do it at that point. So I used to work at East Middle School and Central Middle School in the city of Plymouth. After one of the last instances we had in July with school shootings, the superintendent decided to make school resource officers in every middle school full time. So we always have 2 school resource officers in our high schools, and then we now have 1 school resource officer in every middle school. This is my belief. This is how I work. I'm able to have a good relationship with my school administrators so they know what page I'm on and what I'm willing to do and what I'm not willing to do. The biggest thing is I want to be approachable, accessible, and visible. That's
yeah, that's okay.
You don't want that.
Yes.
So I don't know a lot of kids who are going to come up to me when I look like this. Sometimes it's just an automatic shutdown, or they have certain beliefs, or their family has told them certain things. So when I work, I wear what I call a soft uniform. I just wear cargo pants with a lot of pockets, and I'll wear like a Minnesota United Soccer sweatshirt or just sweatshirts. Everything that I have on me, I carry on me at school, but you don't see it. I keep it in pockets. I keep my sweatshirts over it. The most visible thing are my gun and my taser. I don't wear, I have like a small badge by my pocket, but I've had experiences where the same kid came up to me and started talking to me at lunches, and it took him 2 weeks to realize what I do. And he's like, are you a police officer? I said, yeah. He goes, oh, I'm so sorry. I've been bothering you. And I'm like, nope, this is exactly what we're here for. I am the same person I was yesterday when you talked to me, and this relationship has not changed. So it's been kind of fun. So I have a soft uniform. I request that my office is in a main hallway. I do not want to be sitting next to the principal as a bouncer or a thug or an enforcer or anything like that. I want to be away from all of that, so I kind of appear to be a separate entity, which I truly am. This also gives me a natural access for students to come into my office at any time and just sit down and chat. I'm in the halls during all passing time. I am not only there by word that I'm there for them, but I show it. So I'm in the halls. We have 3 different lunches. I stand for every single minute of every single lunch. I interact with the kids. I talk to them. I'm like, oh, I see you're wearing a soccer shirt. See, I have Minnesota United, and build those connections. I eat lunch with them. Different things like that. I'm always looking for a natural interaction between my students. And I call them my kids because when they're in that building, they are my kids. Whether it's wearing the sports shirt, whether it's 6th grade lunch, they're always putzing and they're always late and they're always racing to dump their trays. I will stand there and I will collect their trays for them. And the teachers come up to me, they're like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you do this? You know, and I'm like, because each kid, I have a face-to-face interaction with that kid, and I'm starting to build a relationship with them. And they look at me like I'm crazy, but I'm like, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing here? I keep snacks in my office. We have a lot of hungry kids in our school. I let everyone know, the counselors, the nurses, teachers, if you have a hungry kid, send them to my office. I don't embarrass them. I don't make them fill out an application or anything like that. It's a chance for me to have a few seconds with them to talk. Sometimes maybe to figure out why they're hungry. Are you eligible for a food program or free lunch? And you're not. Sometimes it's their family has just immigrated and it could be a pride thing where we don't need any help. So I will then work with counselors and stuff to make it a comfortable approach to that family so we can get that kiddo some food. I've started things like standing in the lunchrooms. I see all the food that goes to waste. Started a free table where if you have food, like maybe it's fruit or milk or something packaged that you haven't eaten, you can put it here on the table. If you see something you like, you can pick it up. So we're kind of, I do little things like that, getting food. Presentations is kind of a big thing. And sometimes when you do have a new officer in a school, you have to build that trust and such with the teachers and administration. They kind of know who I am now and know what I'm about. So I do a lot of school presentations, bullying, cyberbullying, social media use, internet safety, general and personal safety. I go to the civics classes and talk about court system and such, drug and alcohol training. One of the things I love to do and I request to do is I go into the English as a second language classes and I just sit down with them and I talk to them because maybe what their police did in their country is a little bit different than we do things here. I kind of dispel some of those mysteries and let them know what we do, and again, build another relationship with somebody in the building. And then obviously now with lockdown drills. I do a lot with lockdown drills and training of staff and students. But again, I'm always begging teachers, anytime I can get in front of your class to build that relationship, I will do anything you need me to. The first thing that I say in all of my presentations is that I am here for them. I'm not here for the principal. I'm not here for the dean. I'm not here for your teacher. I'm not here for your parents. I am your own personal private police officer. So you are number one to me. Everyone else comes second to that. Sometimes I will kind of get a glimpse of a kid who maybe is not as happy as they should be, or you can kind of tell something's going on. If I'm doing one of my presentations, I will talk to counselors, I will talk to social workers, I will talk to the teachers to try and see if there's any students in the classroom that might be going through special things at home or personal life and things. I will kind of gear at least part of that presentation to have a face-to-face with them to let them know that I can help them in those sort of situations. I don't do it to embarrass them. I don't do it where it's really obvious. But again, to let them know there's somebody else in the building that can help them. Obviously, I describe to them, I'm here to keep you safe. But I think with kids, they're really smart. And you actually need to not only speak it, you need to show it. I'm constantly in the hallways checking doorways and such. I'm being present. So when kids are like, why are you checking doors? I want to make sure you guys are safe so you can have fun and learn and not worry about things. Like I said, kids need to not only hear that I'm here for you, but we really need to show them. Kids are really good BS detectors, and they know if you're lying or not. That's one of the really scary things about them, because they'll look at you like, I don't know if you're really telling me the truth or not. So I really try and show through my actions. The most important, I think, the role of school resource officer has a responsibility to do is to have a conversation with administration, which I've done, and thank goodness we're all on the same page. I let them know I will never put my hands on a kid unless they are hurting themselves or they are hurting somebody else. Other than that, do not call me solely in to touch a kid. I'm not ending up on YouTube, I'm not ending up on the news, and I'm not breaking their trust. So I think it's kind of confusing when you've been a police officer and then you go into a school, you're like, who is my boss? Do I have to say what they're telling me to do? Can I have some discretion, this wonderful tool that we're able to do? So I think we need to let administration know that that's not what I'm here for. I think a lot of times staff and administration are having issues with a student and they can't do anything. And so they're like, okay, get the officer in here. And now we're forced to go hands on them, or we're forced to escalate it. In situations I have that, if I have a student who has an audience, I remove the class. You guys go in that classroom over there and we'll just let this kid kind of wind down, or take away the audience and maybe they'll kind of pipe down a little bit. So there's different things that we can use, but I think the most important thing is letting your administration know that we're not a goon, we're not a bouncer. I'm not here to just physically enforce things. My principal always uses this. I'm a school resource officer and they like to focus on the resource. So I am a resource when maybe other things are failing or we need some advice. That's what I'm used for. School rules, not so much for me. I am not going to get at you if you're running in the hallways, if you're wearing a hood, if you're doing things like that. I like to choose my battles. Also, sometimes it helps because the kids don't know what you can do or what you can't do. So I don't like to show my hand. I like to keep them guessing. So school rules, not so much the police officer's concern unless safety is an issue. Do we all know about ACEs?
Yeah.
So that is my thing I'm working on, and that's the adverse childhood experiences, and Nadine Burke-Harris, and I am so on board with this to the point where I was almost trained as a trainer, and then I got scared because I would have to public speak. I'm working on getting that into my schools and my school district, because I think we have a lot of teachers, and I get it, they've got 30 kids in the class, and got one kid that's just always whatever, or they're always really loud, or if you put your hand on them, they just absolutely freak out, and they don't know what to do, so they just refer them to the office, refer them to the office. I'm not saying that teachers need to change necessarily how they're doing things, but I think if we have a little bit of understanding about some of our frequent flyers or some of our kids that we're seeing in the office all over again, and have a little bit of patience and understanding. And I think we have to be comfortable as an administration in sharing some information about maybe what's going on at home and such, and that these kids are always at this level waiting for the next bad thing to happen, and maybe that's the response we're seeing. So I'm really working hard. I'm kind of a pain in the butt at my school because I really want them to get ACEs into the building for all teachers and all staff, just for a little bit of understanding.
ACEs?
ACEs, ACES, and it's adverse childhood experiences. And if you go to YouTube and just Google Nadine Burke-Harris, yeah. So right now I think we're pretty close in getting it into the district, but I think that will help too with the amount of escalation of things and referrals to the office, and maybe instead of putting Band-Aid over situations, we can actually go in there and kind of affect some change with our kids. I work primarily with administration, social workers, and the counselors. Me and the social workers and counselors were like this. There's a law in place that they're allowed to share information and I'm allowed to share information. I think we still have some information that's still a little worried about doing that. So again, it's something with trust and everything. I request from my partners on the street, anytime you have contact with my kids, or anytime you have contact where maybe my kids weren't involved, but they were witness to something, or something, you know, might affect them, I want a copy of that report. Because then what I do is I read through them. I don't run to them in the hallway and be like, oh my God, I see we were at your house again last night and dad's hitting mom or mom's hitting dad. I will go to the counselor, I will tip them off and be like, just so you know, we were at so-and-so's house last night. They saw something pretty horrific. Can you just bring them into the office today and touch base with them and just make sure they're okay? I don't have any contact with it. I let them do it. Most of the time, the counselors and social workers kind of know what's already going on, but they might not be familiar with new changes and such. So again, we have to get comfortable with information sharing. Schools can be really good at circling the wagons around a kid and making sure that they're successful and they're safe and such. We have to make sure that we're including our school resource officers in that, because I sometimes think there's still an us and them. Sometimes too, if I see or hear that a kid is acting out, or I see they're going up to the office again, I'll kind of do some digging on my own, whether it's through child protection or reports and stuff, just to see if there is something going on and that we can kind of start working together on as well. Citations, in 3 years, I've never charged a kid with anything. And my goal is to make it through my entire career as a school resource officer with no tickets, no charges, anything like that. I don't like the administrative types that deal with a problem and then they bring an officer in at the end, can you write a ticket to this? We have to get better at saying, no, I need to be brought in here and we need to kind of figure out together rather than just me being the enforcer on it. Again, being there so long, my administration has felt more comfortable bringing me into things and we can kind of figure out different resources or different ways. Maybe I can make a phone call to a parent and be like, can I help you? What's your goal? What can we do together to get to that end goal to have success for your students before we even get to that point. There is a wonderful thing in Hennepin County called the diversion program, where if you're between the ages like 13 and 17, if you do kind of commit a lower level type offense, instead of writing that citation, I can reference you or refer you to a diversion program. What that program is, it's kids that are kind of doing this a little bit, and we have a feeling that it might get worse, maybe parents looking for a little bit of help, but it's 10 weeks of classes. A parent or guardian has to be there with them. It's learning about drugs and alcohol, the court system, bullying, ways to keep you safe, all of that good stuff that I think all middle schoolers should have to do anyway. And then maybe a little restorative justice or community service or mediation between whoever they're having issues with. So that's another tool we have on our belt that we can use to also go away from any potential charging of students. Sometimes I'll have conversation with parents and we just might, or the parent might just elect to send them to that diversion program anyway, just to kind of head off anything. Parents, I typically will include parents if we have had conversations with counselors and social workers and we feel it's good for them to know I'm involved. I will never go talk to a kid about them being bad or something wrong or illegal that they're doing without a parent's knowledge. I will never violate that with a parent, but there's kind of ways I can be involved, whether it's just having somebody's ear and they reiterate, or sometimes too, I'm always looking for those organic interactions or those organic relationship builders. A counselor might say, okay, at this time I'm going to walk by your office. I'm going to have this student with me. We may just stop and be like, hey, have you ever met Officer Johnson? They might come in and we just have a sort of casual conversations to start those relationship builders. Any questions yet? I've kind of thrown up a lot on you really fast. Did you have any?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have two questions. So one, you mentioned a lot of good stuff, and I have been in a couple of different, at least 2 different school districts, and I have, had an interaction with the school officer and resource officer. And then I think in kind of a larger context, they're kind of similar. I mean, in a way, the work they do, but depending on the building, things that are different in that kind of a level stuff. So do you have, as a school resource officer, is there any kind of a working group together or information sharing between district to district or building to building? Is there any?
No, but I think that would be, as you're saying it, that would be a really good idea. We do have 2 districts within the city of Plymouth, and I know Wayzata district is really different from Robbinsdale district, whether it's lockdown drills, whether it's their policies and such. So I do try and slide information to the different districts, or if I hear of an interesting training coming up, I go to all mental health training for adolescents, and then the normal stuff that you would assume that I would go to. But a lot of time it is that administration, and I think maybe it needs to be a stronger relationship between the police department and the administration of, let's figure out how we can be more consistent, or we can adapt the same sort of policies. So there is, like I said, more consistency and maybe not so much a need for hands-on. There are going to be times that we do just have to, and it's not, force is not pretty. It's ugly, but it needs to be done sometimes, and it's effective. I like to get it before that point I like to kind of know what kids are kind of starting to go off the line where I can gently get that going that way. Or I know kids that I'm going to be dealing with them next year or in a couple months or sooner. So I'm going to start developing that relationship because I kind of like compliance through trust and respect rather than just me being a goon. So I think there's time and energy that needs to be invested. We also have to kind of understand too, not all school resource officers want to be a school resource officer. And that's a problem that I see too. People do not choose to be a police officer so they can leave the road and go into a school and babysit kids. There's not a lot of officers who want to do that. Unfortunately, we have a thing called term limits. So we have an officer in there and maybe they might be really successful and doing really good and the kids and the parents and the administration likes them. They have to leave after a certain time. And so right now I'm kind of working on, can we get rid of term limits if we have a really good working relationship? So what happens then if at the end of my term, at the end of the next school year, I left and nobody else wanted to do my job, people get voluntold to do this job, which means they go down to somebody who maybe has 3 years experience on, they're 25 years old, they don't have kids, they don't have the patience, they don't have the life experience, and we're putting them into a school system. So I think that is something that we can work on too.
Is that consistent for every district? It's a state law or something that limits for how many?
No, it's more of a departmental policy. And whether you're an investigator, whether you're a drug task force, whether you're canine, we always have set term limits to kind of rotate people through. This might be one of those jobs where we need to change that up.
So how long is that? I'm sorry.
So 3 years.
Really?
Yep. So, and that's kind of just when you're getting to know everybody and you're getting comfortable and you're building those relationships, and now you're pulling me out.
That's curious because in our district, there's
Our
been the same
recruit
two. Mike and Sean.
they've been there for
5 years?
no, since I started it.
At least 5.
Okay.
But, so that would be their department making
Yeah.
that policy.
Yeah.
Department,
Each
department.
department is different though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, why would we pull them out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just what I've seen in districts, you know, there are SROs and one school has one school doesn't.
Mhm.
One school has one shares with 5 schools.
Yep.
Yeah. It seems to me that creates just
Sends a-
inconsistency.
And
in
it may
the
send a
district,
message that
and-
we have worse kids here than we
Right.
have over
and
here.
incredibly
And it's the
difficult
perception.
For the SRO who is in one school.
Yep.
Not to be able to be in other schools.
Yep.
So I don't want to make sure we come back to you, and I want to make sure you finish your statement. But one thing that I believe is that money talks.
I was just gonna ask.
And if we follow the money, then that other things get revealed, right? So what are some of the funding models for RSOs in schools?
So I know the district pays for half my salary and the department pays, and it's something that the superintendent has to dip down into the budget to come up with.
And the board has to approve that too, I'm sure.
I'm sure the board has to
Yeah.
approve that. So that's interesting that you have a partnership with the district because it financially it's a 50-50 split,
Mhm.
right? Do you think could relationships be different in districts where it was a 60-40 split or a 70 where the district is paying 70% and the department is paying 30%? Do you think that could have an impact on relationships between the department and the school?
I don't think, because me as the officer, me as the school resource officer, I have no idea who pays my salary. I don't care who pays my salary as long as I get the check. It's just kind of, and sometimes either you have the administration who really overuses their school resource officer or improperly uses their school resource officer. To when I first started at one of my schools, I literally was the monkey in the closet. Push the button if you need me. We really don't want you seen. We don't want this perception. And I think once they see me work, because if if I went and talked to a kid at lunch, they'd be like, why were you just talking to that kid? I'm like, because he had a soccer ball and I was gonna ask if he wanted to play at recess, you know? We have to get over that and we have to trust our officers and such. But we have to be used appropriately, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. And they need to understand why we're there and all of the different reasons that we can be used, not just punitive, but we're one-on-one with your social workers, your counselors, your all of that. So again, instead of putting a Band-Aid on a problem or a situation, we can actually fix it and we can work with that family. And if I grab a 6th grader who's going through some stuff, I got 3 years with that kid. And sometimes for me, it may take over a year to build it. There's one specific kid and I'm like, I knew what was going on at home. I know his dad was beating him at home. I know the police were getting called, but he never talked. When the officers got there, he never talked. So they just kind of, I can't help you. So I would then see the nights where it would kind of happen. I would send emails to those officers and I would say, okay, if you go back there, suggest this, suggest the football team, suggest, you know, going to the weight room to working off, you know, kind of again, working behind the scenes. The counselors would try and get some sort of a relationship. It wasn't until like a year and a half later where I'm standing out of the buses and this young man walks by me and says, have a nice weekend, Officer Johnson. And I was like, if nothing else happens this year, I'm good. It is those little things that we really strive for. And I hope people understand that.
I want to get your.
I've just got to thinking, because each department, police department works with the city they are in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's school districts that have, their school boundaries are different cities.
So, and we have like with the Wayzata district, most of our schools are in the city of Plymouth, but we do have one in the city of Wayzata. So Wayzata fills the position that's in their city. Plymouth fills the position that's in their city.
Because Hopkins has the boundaries. We
Yep.
have Minnetonka, we have part
You have
of
a little bit of
Prairie,
Plymouth.
We have part of Old Valley. I mean, it's so over.
Yep.
So.
Do you have a culture liaison at your school?
Nope, we do not. And in fact, we are just getting, because I was at 2 schools, English as a second language class or something. So we're kind of seeing more the need for it and such and getting somebody in our building that can kind of start getting us going in that direction. So I think this will be the first step. But as far as that title, no. I think we have many people who wear many different hats, but not somebody where that's their sole position.
Well, you do a lot of what we already do. When you were saying explaining what you were doing, it was very similar. But you also said something where like the school resource officers are there for a specific time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I worked for the high school that I graduated from. And the officer there was the officer when I was at.
See, and I wish we could have something like that where we didn't have these parameters. And now that I'm on the street for the summer, it's on my list of things to do to try and do away with term limits. And just every year, just revisit with the administration and revisit with the officer. Are we still happy? Is this still working? Is this still being effective? And then the officer just kind of showing what they're doing throughout the year and that they're not just kind of hiding out in the school. So I think that needs to be kind of understood. And I think after talking here, I can even go back to my chief now and be like, listen, this is kind of a consistent thing. So.
Okay, my question was about the diversion program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, since you kind of explained a little bit about it. So do they, like, do the children or whoever have to be referred to the program?
So
or like
typically how it works is if you are a first-time juvenile offender, if you're between the ages, I don't know if it's, I want to say, I think we can even squeak them in even if they're 12 to 17. Instead of me, I can write them a ticket, but in my report, check to see if they're eligible for the diversion program, which I've already checked and they are, which is the only reason that I would even write the ticket is to get them into this program. And then, like I said, it's 10 weeks of classes. They have to go with a parent or a guardian, so there's some accountability too on the parent's part. So they're also kind of hearing the same thing. There might be community service, they're able to tailor it to the exact needs.
So if like, or this is just, but like if you were to see any precursors of that they might end up with a citation like that, could you still refer them to that?
So my only worry is you can only go to this program once. So if I have a kiddo, and I always, when I do my presentations, I'm like, my job here is when I see you going like this, I'm gonna gently guide you back onto the right path. My worry with that is if I have a kid who's showing the precursors and stuff, and I think he needs this program, my only fear is that if I talk to the parents and they agree that this would be beneficial, if a month down the road they get caught stealing or something, they can't go to the diversion program and they have a kid. So my biggest fear is that we use up that one opportunity for the diversion program and now they're stuck with something. And the diversion program doesn't go on your record. It doesn't do anything like that. It's just giving.
Yes. So there's a couple of things, particularly in Hennepin County. There is there's a gentleman by the name of Willie Bridges. If you want to get resources for diversionary tactics, I don't have his number, but I can get that to you. Name is Willie Bridges. It's an easy name to remember. He does a lot of referrals to a number of different programs. So I know that the Boy Scouts have a diversion program. That's the 10-week program. I know that CMRS, that Beth is the executive director of, they also do restorative justice, which there are lots of ways in which that can be done. That's in that book. So if you read that book, there are ways in which those things can be done to kind of address some of those preemptive things, but also to look at, so can you speak to a little bit the difference between, because it shows up in schools too, broken window policing versus community policing?
Okay, so are you talking about an officer just responds to the act of?
Just responding to the active
so
stuff, or looking for all the, if we hit all the little things, they won't escalate to a big thing. So if we take care of all these little behaviors, running in the hall, hoodies on.
Okay,
blah,
so
blah,
that's
blah,
really interesting that you say that, because being not in the school and me standing and observing all the lunches and standing in the hallways and stuff like that, sometimes I think we do kids a disservice. I'm a really strong believer that all kids are held to the same expectation, no matter what you look like, what your abilities are, everything like that. Because school is not only for math and science and all that sort of book learning, but you're also learning how to be an effective member in society. And we're learning how to deal with maybe a teacher or principal you don't agree with. That could be a boss someday, or a parent. Following rules, being held to standards, accountability, all of that. Because if we don't, we're kind of setting them up for failure. If we kind of coddle kids and make exceptions for them or excuses for them, when they hit high school, when they hit the real world, it's going to be a rude awakening. Right now is the time, how you learn to brush your teeth 2 times a day and it just becomes habit. We need to kind of develop these habits as well. And I see it because I observe it all the time. If we look at a kid and we're like, oh, I'm not going to hold you to the same expectations I hold your classmates for because of the way you look, or I know you have a really rough life, or things like that. They're smart enough to sense this. And they're looking at you saying, if you don't have high expectations of me and you don't think I can do this, well, I'm not going to have high expectations of myself. And I see this take place every day, but I can't really say anything. One of my principals does a really cool thing. Once kids leave the school, a couple of years later, he may contact them and have them come back to school and be like, can you tell us how we can do this better? Some of his kids of color or more challenging kids or challenged kids say, my parent or my teachers made it very clear they didn't have very high expectations for me. And I saw right through that. And so I said, if you don't have high expectations for me, why would I try and strive? And there was an exhibit at the Science Museum, race exhibit. And one of the videos was talking to kids who didn't look like me. And they said, what was your biggest takeaway from school? And they said that pissed them off to no end. So I think kind of what you're going on is that we need to have those same expectations for every single kid so that they can come into society and be successful members and understand rules/laws, or how do I deal with conflict with a teacher/boss. We're giving them those social tools and skills too. I think there's a way it can be done really effectively and really constructively, and little by little. And like I said, the people who circle the wagons, whether they hear it from me, whether they hear it from a parent, a counselor, a social worker, a dean. I thought you were.
I did. I know public speaking is not your favorite thing to do, but what are the topics you usually teach? You said you do topics for the staff, and you do for children as well?
The only topics I do for the staff right now are the drills and getting them comfortable with the drills and getting them proficient or understanding that I'm going to be pretty much worthless if we go into a lockdown, and what can you do?
So wait. You just drove by that. I want to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So wait a minute, because you said in a lockdown you would be pretty much worthless.
No.
No, that's what you said.
Oh, no.
That is different.
Like I try and teach the teachers because I kind of want to know who's really uncomfortable with this.
Right.
And if I'm doing a presentation, I'll kind of sense that, and I say, I'll come to your classrooms and we can kind of go over what you can do. And some feel really comfortable saying, I'm going to shut down. I'm not going to be effective. I'm not going to be able to do anything in this.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, okay, this is what we're going to have set up for you then. And we're going to make your room like a really good barricaded room. We're going to, do this and that to kind of make them feel better and keep their kids safer and stuff like that. And then the only other thing, like I said, in trying to speak in front of the teachers would be the ACEs, bringing ACEs to them and the understanding of this kid you see in front of you is acting that way for certain reasons. Because there's drugs in their house, because they see their mom getting beaten, because there's no supervision, Yep. So for kids, mostly it's social media, cursed social media, how to stay safe. I talk about sexting. I talk about sending inappropriate pictures, how it could be a criminal thing, but we don't try and go that route. But how do you keep yourself safe?
Adults need that training.
Oh my God, I have had that. My mom sent a pic. I'm like, okay, I don't need to get that. Or they'll come to my office and they'll be like, my mom is newly divorced and she's been doing this. And I tell her she shouldn't be doing this.
Oh my gosh. I know, right? I got one more question. In our school, I work for the elementary school, and I am very passionate. I started actually working at the high school, but I saw there were some students that we came to their life too late. So I am very passionate about starting early, preschool and elementary. I love elementary, and we already see kids that go that bad. So we started a group, and I started actually when we were at the high school. We call it Voice of Hope. And a counselor led this, and kids that were at risk. Anyway, so now in elementary we do that with the girls group and boys group. We select the students that we know are gonna go to that path and try to get them ready for middle school. We sometimes run out of topics. What to talk to. We brought the sheriff the other day. We've been presented, and they all want to be police now. So what are the topics? What are the topics for a third, fourth grader? Now we're gonna have some third. Do you think it can be impact? They make them start thinking about it. Like,
so the big thing would be social media, because you'd be surprised how many kids at 5th grade have their phones. And we're giving their little unformed brains access to a whole internet of things that their little brains are not ready for. I see a lot of anxiety with kids, even my 6th graders and such with that. Sometimes if I'm looking at conversations, they're having chat groups at midnight on school nights, and the parents are so worried about, I want to be their friends. I'm not going to look at their phone. I'm not going to shut off the Wi-Fi. But I would start laying the groundwork for that, because if they don't have that now, a phone now, they're going to in 6th grade. Just the responsibility, and that once you put something out there, you can't get it back. All of those good things. I'm very frank and open. I talk about predators, and I explain how, years and years ago, when I was a kid, I was forced to leave my house to go socialize. We didn't have cell phones. And it was really easy to spot these creepy people because it was the guy at the arcade who didn't have any kids, who kind of made your tummy feel kind of weird and like something's wrong, and we could know to avoid them. But I talk about how predators are approaching kids on social media now. I give specific cases because I know from doing this, kids learn better through real life stories. Fake accounts we discuss, all that good stuff. Sometimes it's just the safety thing. Sometimes it's I present on a Jacob Wetterling thing on bullying. Bullying is huge.
What about respect? You know, how, because that's what we see, the kids have started disrespecting the parents.
It's hard because sometimes that's learned
and
at home.
teachers.
And this is a learned behavior. And it's kind of hard to break that. And it's kind of hard where at school we're teaching respect and then they're going right back home into that environment. So yet they demand respect, but they're not very good at giving it. So that's your job. Just general safety. I always empower kids to have 5 trusted adults in their life where something's going really wrong, someone's hurting them, someone's touching them, they're being bullied, whatever. They have, whether it's a teacher, school resource officer, a parent, an auntie, whoever. If you go to somebody, they don't help you, you go to the next one until somebody actually helps you. I try and teach kids no is a complete sentence, that you don't need anything else besides no. Having the power of no, I think, needs to be impressed upon them for a multitude of different things.
I'm sorry, it's just so contradicting sometimes because in preschool or sometimes the early elementary years, teachers are taught not to tell kids no, or parents are being taught not to tell kids no.
No, kids can be told no. I'm saying if I'm a 5-year-old and someone's touching me or asking me to do things I don't feel comfortable with, I have to have power and strength behind my no and understand no is a complete sentence. Or if I'm a 6th grade girl and a boy I want to date says, well, you got to send me a picture first. No. And that's all I need to tell you.
But they're being taught not to. Yeah, it's just so sometimes.
I know.
But as long as it's
so just things like that. I would say the biggest thing is bullying and cyberbullying right now because that kind of spills into everything. And it's completely, we've had in our district, we've had suicides this year already. Or this last school year, we've had a couple of
Cool. I want to take maybe 3 more questions because your time is valuable and whatnot. So,
so my question is, our district is going through major budget cuts, and we have been we are on the hotspot right now. We were even on the newspaper where the district is not telling the community as well. A lot of the cuts that they're doing are make everything that involve resources. And so the high school, we only have 1 high school for the Brentsville, Egan, and Savage. So yeah, the numbers are high. We have had conflicts where her and I were there. They believe there was shooting involved. It's just turned into chaos. We didn't have an officer on site that day, and it was supposed to be a cultural night. The message that was sent out was totally the opposite than what really we wanted to send. And they're going to be cutting the officers. And so one of the questions that one of the parents said, can we as parents request to the city, so in this case it would be the department, that the presence is important, and can the department actually fund it, and if the community actually asks for it?
I don't see why not. And all they can say is no. How are they going to send, especially with everything going on with safety and stuff, how are they going to say no to that? And I know there's like things going through with budget within the state and stuff to send more resources that way.
Yeah, because what they're doing right now, they're cutting most of the resources, and that was one of the big things also that was mentioned on the paper. They're not cutting that higher staff. Instead, they're cutting from the bottom.
You just need to document everything that your school resource does for you, especially with the safety in the building. I think it's important for kids to voice out and say, I feel safer when you're here. I get that a lot now. Parents say, I feel safer knowing that you're here.
We started building this group that's called, and I was going to share that yesterday, forgot about it. It's called Get to Know Your Neighbor. So we're getting to hear a lot more from the community as well, and who we are as a community and your neighbors. And the cultural group from the high school was invited. And this is a group of children representing their own culture. And what the community got to hear was huge. And I think there's a lot more messages heard from our children.
I think people are really, really busy nowadays and they just catch the blips.
Yes.
So I think we have to kind of force people, or actually like, okay, I've got your attention, but now you really need to understand all this. Because right now it's everyone's busy, everyone's on their phone, everyone's this. I only have enough time for that. So I think you just have to present something that's kind of concise and to the point and get it out to the public. And I think if the public actually heard, they would be like, wait a second, what's going on?
So I do want to hear from a couple of people who haven't heard from yet. Are there just a couple of questions?
Maybe it is a question for you, but maybe with the experience that everyone in the town is a lot of people without documents. So sometimes when the police or even when the school is facing issues with the students, they are not treating them in the same line because they're being softer with them because they know if it's a consequence and it's on the paper, they are going to get some effect because the legal situation that they have. So what is maybe the best way to work with these students? Like, and I'm maybe going to name some, like they find drugs in their backpacks.
So they're afraid to turn the student in?
Because they
So here's the deal. When I have pills and drugs turned into me, I don't necessarily even do about it. Because I don't have a status quo. I'm going to contact the parent. Do you need help? Are there other things going on? I'm going to talk to the administration. Do we really need, can we just do like an in-school suspension or whatever?
But then
It doesn't have to rise to a criminal level.
Like, oh, and then I can bring drugs. I'm just going to get a school suspension, and really nothing is going to happen because you are being soft with me because you know my legal stuff.
So what is your relationship with ICE?
I have no relationship with ICE.
So if a student gets it's truant or gets caught with drugs or gets into a fight, and there's a suspicion that they may not have papers to be here, that's not your, so
not
you
my
don't.
concern. Police don't even do a truancy anymore. Social workers deal with the truancy. They've taken.
In the case like we as a cultural liaisons are like there for these kids, and we start to learn that something is going on at home. If we know that if we say something, the family is going to be in risk because for sure the police is going.
So I always kind of have is a kid being hurt? Are they in danger? Is their safety in jeopardy? That supersedes
but the thing is,
everything.
If they separate the family, the student is going to be in danger, the student is going to be in a lot of economic issues because something is going to happen.
Yeah.
It's kind of what we talked about before, right?
So what really, maybe from your point of view or the experience that you have, sometimes I don't know what to do. Like, oh my God, should I say something? Should I not? Should I get involved with the police?
And you can do stages and everything can be created for that specific student. So if school consequences aren't working and parents are involved and they're having consequences at home and that's not working, you can always have an officer simply talk to them and say, this is what could happen. And unfortunately, one of those things, if we have to take it a step further, your parents are going to be brought into this and maybe citizenship issues. And that's going to fall on you for bringing drugs in. Sometimes giving them information and empowering them will set them to do the right thing. So I think someone really needs, like a police officer has to have a conversation with them and say, listen, we're trying to deal with it like this, but we can't all the time. You're going to force our hand. And if this happens because they don't know what else to do with you, this could affect your family status in the country.
Please, you were, I saw your hand going up and down.
Yeah,
Jumping in on you.
I just, in the vein of kind of what I believe this course is about, what I'm taking from it, what I'm kind of learning with the text that we have and everything. You know, we've been really digging deep into some really uncomfortable pieces around equity, some uncomfortable pieces around restorative pieces, some of the diversion program. And even as I look at, I believe you were here when we were talking about this carrot piece. And I think it's relevant here. So I was up and down because I was thinking of all the examples of things that might counter like your individual awesome experience in your school, right? My experience has not been positive, right? Many of the students that I serve, their experiences have not been positive with officers. And so when I think about like this carrot metaphor that was used, I think about what people see on the surface with our students, some of that implicit bias that kicks in, and some of those pieces that I think when students, for whatever reason, whether their family's back in another country or their family dynamic is broken, right? They kind of lost some of that root. And so they do show up often as just the greens, if you heard that, if that makes sense here. And so I think I don't see a lot of work within the community, restoring and partnering and kind of just doing the work before they enter into the school. So oftentimes the first connection on the street or in schools are based off of implicit bias or, really bad experiences or, pieces like that as well. And so I'm wondering, if you can speak to that or not just, I think the great relationship you have with your administration, I wish everyone had that.
Yep.
Truly, I think we all agree that we all need that, right? And so that's not the case. And so I'm just curious, maybe some of your thoughts about that.
So how are you kind of, before they even get into school, how we're making contacts with the community?
And maybe if you have an understanding, kind of just that broader, not just Plymouth, right? But the work that can be done or should be done in that way.
So
if that
so unfortunately, I don't know that Officer Johnson can talk about the kind of stuff that you want to talk about. Only not because, and I'm not going to speak for her, but the confines of what I've asked her to do is to talk about Plymouth. Because I want, if an aspirin solves a headache, a lack of aspirin doesn't mean I have a headache, if that makes sense, right? So I wanted to show a good example of how this stuff is working. Because what I know is, I know Todd Axel personally, right? So he's the chief of police for the city of St. Paul. He is wrestling with the old guard versus the new guard. And not everybody is trying to guard, right? Or more people are trying to guard than they're trying to serve. So again, going back to this context is important. And so as much as you can do that, but that's not what I asked.
No, and I totally get it. And so, I know enough to be dangerous, but what I can say is I know what our city and other cities are doing, whether it's the DARE program, just getting officers at that elementary age into the school so they're familiar, they develop comfort, understanding, oh, so this is what you do. You're not like on TV or, what I see in my neighborhood or whatever. Again, ACEs, I think we really need to bring in at early education. I think it really needs to start there. The nice thing about ACE is that it does include the family. So we kind of maybe have a learned behavior that's handed down from generation to generation. We grab mom and dad or whoever's in the household and the kid. So we change both. So I think it needs to start really early, really young. It needs to be not only inclusive of the kid, but I also think of the family. Like I said, DARE programs, we have so many different, and Plymouth is different. We have a board on the back of our PD of different community engagements that you can go to and sign up for. One of the things that I just started, because we don't have officers in the elementary or the pre-K, is that officers on duty can come have lunch with your students, and like the school covers it, or we have a fund that we can use, but just to start getting officers into the schools, into the pre-K, into the elementary, so we do have that relationship and foundation and hopefully start building trust. In those times, we can kind of communicate, we develop relationships with the school, so that elementary school counselor can call us and say, can you just come talk to a kid? Things are.
So are you
Yeah.
suggesting that all those things that you're doing are helping to overcome implicit bias?
I think we're trying to help all kids at the earliest age possible as far as developing and being as healthy as possible and developing relationships and such. As far as the implicit bias part, it's hard for me to speak on things where if I wasn't there and I didn't see something take place, I would never want another officer coming in and being like, well, you weren't there, why are you talking? You know, I can kind of just talk about what I know. If I do see it in the schools, I know that I say something about it. I don't know how much further I can go on that.
Well, and I'll just set the stage for this last piece, which I think is important, right? So our kids have, I'd imagine that many of the white kids that interact with you have been given the officer-friendly conversation, right? It's a safe person to go to. If you're ever in danger, look for the flag and look for an officer, right? So that kind of thing. But there are also members of the community that that's not the message that they've got. So how have you been able to not only just bridge that, but are there pieces that you have done, that you do inside the school, but also just kind of walking around to kind of dismiss some of those other myths that go with?
And just little things that might be driving through the neighborhoods and getting out of your car, getting out of, into parks and such, stopping off at these early childhood education places. We work closely with like Home Free Shelter. We're very involved with Home Free Shelter. We have carnivals for the kids at Home Free Shelter to be like, you may have seen mom or dad get arrested and stuff, but we're here to let you know we can be creative and figure, how to do that and stuff. There's a million different things that we can do. Whether it's like handing out bike coupons, whether it's just taking every single opportunity you have with a kid who might not have the same viewpoint as these kids over here, and realizing the opportunity you've been given and try and affect that and change that. That's going to come up to each individual officer. That's not something that can be handed down. They have to have it within themselves to be like, I want to affect change and I want this kid to know that they can trust me and that I'm there to keep them safe. That's something each individual officer has to do. And it has to be supported by the department, and it has to be supported through different programs and outreach programs. We reach out to some communities and they say, nope, not interested. So we can try. Maybe we'll come around and try doing it a different way, but it just takes time, it takes trust, it takes understanding. And, maybe if they see us working over here and they're like, okay, that's not so bad, and maybe now you can come back in. But I know with the Somali community, we've reached out to them as SROs to even talking to the kids, like, how can we, develop a relationship? And some of the kids are like, we don't want one. Okay, we'll come back and readdress this in a month or, but I mean, it is a constant working battle. But like I said, it comes down to each individual officer and department, and we try, we want it, we try, and we just have to figure out until something works.
So what you're describing, that's community policing. And when I was in my class, I take 2 classes, I took a diversity class because I'm a criminal justice major, and I took another one with a police chief, and one of the things was asking questions like when a police officer approaches like in the Asian community or a Hmong community, like what do you need to do? And like those type of classes now are law enforcement and criminal justice majors taking, so that they know how to approach that. But many years ago, they weren't taking.
Oh no, like I said, that's why I always ask to go into the English as a second language and just answer questions.
Which is really important, and I've said that, like, why don't teachers do something like that too, so that they can learn about different cultures, different diversities, how to approach those things, how to approach that community.
Yep.
And one of the biggest things that I remember also from school is parents. Like your parent will, you're gonna get grounded. Well, I'm gonna call the police if you don't do this.
No, yeah, I hate
And
that. And that's why when admin does that, I'm like, no.
The negative towards police officers.
And like I said, it's not through just words, it has to be through action. They have to see us doing this, and it's gonna take time. Some might happen quicker than others. It just takes time, and it has to be commitment and.
Just a quick thought. Thank you for being here because yeah, it's just like those negative experiences and what you hear on television and anything else. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but it as culture liaison and intercultural specialist, oftentimes I feel like we're trailblazers in building this career, which is why we're here in this workshop, because there's not one major, right? Okay, I'm gonna major in this to become an intercultural specialist. So I wanted to hear what the training with the resource officer position, or what the job description looks like, what, like what are the qualifiers, backgrounds, and working in
So
education.
basically, if a position opens for a school resource officer, we just put in a letter of interest, and then whoever puts in that letter of interest, the administration, the chief, can kind of pick through and be like, not the best personality type, or this person would be really good. They'll also run it by the school administration to be like, what type of personality fit are you looking for and such. The training is just the same as with any other officer, and part of our training as a police officer, we have people from different cultures come in and present to our department all the time, just different understandings, or like if we're dealing with peoples of certain communities, don't look them in the eye, or if you're a female, go to the female, if you're a male. So we try doing those things. It's already kind of integrated.
And is it ongoing training?
We do it's mandatory that we do over 60 hours of training a year within the police department. I think we're at 62 right now, plus anything else that we want to do. Yep, so it's constantly learning. And then if there's things through the school with Ramadan, we had one of our paras or assistants came in and cooked for us and kind of described what takes place and stuff. So we're always kind of trying to immerse ourselves and understand and respect and Anything else? Oh, I'm gonna go pass out or throw up in my squad car.
You did a really good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a somewhat tenuous topic in terms of
But it's one of those things, it's like I wanted to get out and speak about it, and there are some misconceptions. There's some that's true and we still need to work on, but how can we together kind of affect this? And
thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it. So context is everything, right? Context is everything. So it is obvious that Officer Johnson comes from a particular context. And we have to keep that in mind as we look at being right versus effective, right? So there were a couple of things that I picked up on, this idea of circling the wagons. Anybody pick that up? Very, very kind of pioneer, colonial, Western kind of thing. So I picked that up. I didn't feel that I needed to educate her on that topic at this point, but we have a relationship now. So now that I'm closer to her, I can say, remember when you were in that class and you said this thing? Just think about that next time you say, oh, but had I corrected her here, that would have been embarrassing, blah, blah, blah. I'd have been right, but I don't know that that would have been effective. Right? The other thing to also recognize is that Plymouth is what kind of suburb? What kind of suburb is Plymouth?
Wealthy.
It's a wealthy, right? Mostly white, or at least economically affluent. So that context will produce a certain kind of policing, both positive and negative, right? When we look at Minneapolis, or we look at St. Paul, where I'll say this and then we'll take a break. And I'm going to call his name because I can, because I know him, and he also knows he's wrong, but he won't admit it. So there's a guy named Nick Zerwas, who is a state senator from Elk River, right? Elk River. Now remember Elk River. Anybody know where Elk River is? Right? So pretty north, pretty away from, not quite, greater Minnesota, but like the gateway to greater Minnesota. So he wanted to pass a bill that said that protesters should be financially liable for protesting, which is interesting because there's already, some statutes that say if you damage property, you'll be held liable for the property that you damage. But his language wanted to be primarily about protesters, and specifically protesting in major arteries, like on highways, trains, airport, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So how many protests have you heard of in Elk River?
Never. It's like city.
Never, right? So in this conversation, so he wants to criminalize this thing, but I'm talking with Chief Harto at the time, and then later Chief Rondo and Chief Todd Axel in St. Paul, and Rondo respectively in Minneapolis, and I'm talking to them, and guess what? How they feel about it? They have a different take on what needs to happen, and guess why? Context. They have relationships with these people that are upset and are protesting. So with that relationship, guess what they can do? They can have conversations with these folks, right? They don't have to make up these rules and these laws to do these things. And so so Nick lives in Elk River. Not really effective with this. Doesn't really have relationships with people who are doing this thing. So if Nick goes up to talk to these people and say, stop doing that, what are they going to say to Nick? Who are you? Right? But when Minneapolis chief or St. Paul chief hears about these things, and then they go to folks and say, okay, what's going on? They can actually say, we have a relationship with you. Let's at least talk about it. Even if we're going to do what we're going to do anyway, we'll at least talk to you about it, right? So that the same thing goes with when we look at this community policing stuff, and we look at policing in schools, that those contexts are very important. The relationships are very important, and whether we're in an urban area or an affluent suburb, though that context plays into how people get seen in our places. I will tell you that if I'm an undocumented family, I may not know, because of how I came into the country, I may not know that the police in my city are not working with ISIS. I might not know that. So I'm going to carry my life as if they are, right? And I'm going to feed that to my kids and blah, blah. So we're not going to, and it's funny because people talk some with the model minorities or whatever, and people love the work ethic of immigrants south of the border, so to speak. But what they don't realize is that part of that work ethic is because we're still operating in a system of slavery that we just increased the wages of, right? So living in terror of having your family ripped apart, and I'm starting to spin, so we need a break. Because I believe that the biggest terrorist happens to be in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But we'll take a break. Let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. All right. Thank you. Not the biggest. I believe there's terrorism, not the terror.
I like how you
Yeah.
¿Cómo están? ¿Cómo te fue? Just email. If Nick doesn't respond, please email her because, yeah, because I emailed her and also, okay? Okay, sorry.
No.
But because it's not going to be until next week, a week after next week. But I just thought it kind of, not until a week after next week.
Well, you had emailed me that she was coming next week.
Yeah, and I will be here too. Yeah. No, not you. A week after. Remember the second week.
Do you have a highlighter?
No, I do have red.
Somebody.
No,
No, if you don't, that's fine.
yeah, I don't have.
No, I thought it's the 26th because I just said, oh, then the 26th. Oh, the 27th. Clark. CRARK. Yep. Medical. Yep. Not this company, I know that. Because I know that I will be here.
Maybe I just have to look at it.
Okay, look up again and then call me, okay? Representation.
It's hard stuff.
It's so hard. No, I know and I also know.
So what he was hoping.
Understand that she talks. The officer we are dealing with is just her mother.
Yeah.
And so I have to give my office to him because my office is in the middle, and he wants that. I have to give to him. They have moved me. No, it's individual and also administration. It is so true. What she said is that is so true. I just want to say, I will miss the afternoon, but I have church to take note.
And then it's like,
It's very much what we're talking about.
No, it's under.
So, how, and you get,
And then also
But at least they were and what I did was So
Just say, okay,
So it works out that way, but I would say it put me in a position where if I lose this piece by supporting me in some language that can take it if I know it's like, how do I make it? So, yeah, and then you and I think we go with you trust that the relationship that you're building is hard times. This is what I have to do
Something you said that so if I feel like I feel like somebody's I'm really concerned. Well, discipline that this kid may be down when I go. I'm going to interpret it. Social refinement. So maybe it worked itself out. This is the magic about living
Exactly.
I think because people have to live so in some ways we have to
No, I think I asked you.
She didn't, but maybe that
outside of the system and say, look, you know, that was my fault. You lied on me.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
these are like
You just sparked something for our next conversation. Getting my folks
He's going with Colombia. I want to go to Guatemala. I may come
Yeah, but she's
Wow.
All right,
Wow.
So context is everything. So what we also, so context is everything. So just in conversations and in thinking about things that we also have to recognize that the families that we're dealing with are all over the map in terms of their experiences, their relationships, just like human beings, right? And there are folks who oftentimes seek to exploit those things, right? So we were just talking about the decrease in child welfare calls in the so-called Hispanic or Latinx community. Do you think there are any contributing factors to why there may be a decline in CPS calls in the kind of Hispanic or Latinx community?
Trust with the police.
Yeah, trust with police.
Parents train their children very well too.
Yeah, so zip it up. Don't talk about it.
The presence of cultural liaisons.
The presence of cultural liaisons at schools. All right. So those could be mitigating factors. One of the biggest things I would suggest is probably fear. Right. So fear, because we're operating in an environment that we have to talk about, right? So I didn't pull up my slides, but I typically have some slides that talk about what the 2016 elections look like. And for the most part, there are, let me see, where's my other marker?
Right down the line.
So we'll use black and whatnot. So for the most part, in the 2016 election, for all things considered, let's say that is blue, and that this is blue, and there are a couple of other places, kind of New Yorkish, that were blue, but for the majority of the country, it was red. And when we talk about this kind of red and blue stuff, what is that typically related to? When we talk about red and blue, in particular in politics. Republican and Democrat. And which color is which? Democrat is blue and Republicans are red. And what is typically said about those two parts? Conservative and liberal, right? How many people heard people talk about it? And I don't know if you were one of those folks or whatnot, but heard people talk about their surprise of that election, that they were surprised by the outcome of that election. Anybody ever hear someone talk about that? Right? It was all over the news that the people were surprised about the outcome of the election. And why were they surprised at the outcome of the election? Yes.
At least from my understanding, the candidate president's campaign was a negative campaign towards certain religious groups and towards the other minorities in the country. More on like, we get these people and then we bring the American normal back to what it used to be, something like that. So for me, at least, you know, I grew up in another country, so I came here too, and it was not, you know, coming to my mind that the kind of the general American majority would agree that negative message. So for me, the negative was, okay, if this guy's, if the president, you know, at the time would have any other message, yes, I would say people would be inclined or would be following that message. But the complete message was about, let's get them, let's get this group, kind of like that. So that's the message we had. And then the majority of the country to agree that message was a surprise for me.
Okay.
So that was a surprise.
So that was surprising.
Exactly.
What if that wasn't the message? So what did people try to use to determine how the election was going to go? What did they try to use to determine that? They used polls, right? Exit polls, right? Now, how does anyone know how an exit poll works? Anybody taking a survey? Right? This is the same thing, right? So the exit poll is a survey. So they ask people a bunch of questions and blah, 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 blah. And so that they use those exit polls to say, it's going to be this way and not that way. In retrospect, what might have been the challenge? Because the exit polls showed something totally different than what actually happened. So where might the problem be? Because the exit poll said it was going to be this way, but it turned out this way.
But also the electoral college works different.
Yep, so the electoral college, and we can get into the weeds about that as well.
I think a lot of people wanted to give the impression that they wouldn't support a racist bigot for office, and then, but once they got behind closed doors, they said, well, he's a sexist, he's a this, and now I'm still gonna vote for him just because, well, he's a change from sort of the way they do.
Okay, so you got a lot of value judgments in what you just said. Like it's what you just said was loaded.
Right, but I'm saying that there were folks, and still are folks, who say that who do not want to admit to necessarily supporting someone like that for.
But also,
okay.
Maybe just like, oh, they're gonna win. I don't have to do anything.
Okay, so some people say they're just gonna win. I don't have to do anything. Yes.
You know that the exit poll kind of influenced the turnout of the people that was gonna vote. It gave the impression that, well, it's gonna turn for Hillary. So the turnout was not,
from Democratic side.
It kind of influenced.
Okay, so some people believe that influenced it. I want us to think differently about the whole thing because I think we've been set up. I think the whole thing was a setup. What do you mean by that? I'm not an anarchist. I believe in I believe in order, and I believe in all sorts of stuff. But I started looking at things very critically, right? So where I grew up, there were fake gangs. And when we say fake gangs, these are kids who got together and did bad stuff, and people said that they were gangs, right? They weren't really gangs. They were just kids who got together and did bad stuff, right? When I lived in St. Louis, I got exposed to real gangs when I was in St. Louis, right? And so there I won't go into all the little factions, but two big factions of gangs were the Bloods and the Crips. What do you think their color schemes were? Red and blue. So those gangs are bad, but our Democratic and Republican gangs are good. Same color scheme, right? So I started thinking critically about this, and I thought about exit polls. So what could make an exit poll not show what people said was going to happen? The wrong question. So those exit polls ask the wrong questions. And guess what they ask about the polls? Are you Democrat or Republican? Did you vote Democrat or Republican? So if those are the questions that I'm asking, but I'm getting a different result, maybe people voted for something different than what I'm asking about. Maybe they voted different from what I'm asking about. Maybe they didn't vote for Republicans. Maybe they didn't vote for Democrats. But maybe they voted for something more fundamental. So we talk about this idea of liberal and conservative. And we use big C's for that. I actually believe that election was about small C's and about small L's. What do you mean by that? What does the word conservative mean?
Traditional values.
Traditional.
Values.
No. Let's back up.
Yeah.
Get out your smartphones and look up the definition of conservative. So what does conservative mean?
Holding to traditional attitudes and values and cautious about change or innovation, typically in relation to politics or religion.
Cautious about change. Is it possible that people actually voted about their caution about change? The previous administration was all about what? Change. Change has come to America. Hope. Let's make it better. While simultaneously, people were concerned about change. I saw tons of bumper stickers that said, "I want my change back, America," right? Anybody see stickers like that or whatever? And sometimes that stuff, right? So there were people concerned about this change. So is it possible that people voted conservative with a small c because they were concerned about change?
Fear again.
Right?
Fear about it.
So fear could be an aspect of that, right? Fear could be an aspect of that. Why am I talking about this in this particular way? Why the small c? Why must we be concerned about that? So this idea of liberal, right? So what is? Can you look up the word liberal for me as well?
Open to new behavior or opinions and willing to discard traditional values.
Sounds very interesting. They are the exact opposite. Little L's. So when this thing, where we are, okay, so Moana, anyone seen Moana? Yeah. Love Moana, right? So I hate Disney, but I love Moana. Right? Why might I like, having a 4-year-old girl, why might I like Moana?
The music?
There's the music too, right? You're welcome! I'm trying to do that chest thing he does in the thing, right? I have to use my elbows. Yes. Moana was Moana. Yes, Moana.
Sorry.
Right.
It's empowering to young girls.
It's empowering to young girls. In what respect? What about?
She's a leader, she's brave.
She can break tradition.
Yeah.
And
Change.
She wanted to make a change.
She would-
Like, so she had to change her dad's mind because he didn't want it. Because it had caused, what was it? Something.
Yeah, they forgot their artifacts, right? They were sailors and they forgot about it. They were voyagers, right? And they forgot. But here's the plot. If you haven't seen Moana, I'm going to spoil it for you. Here's the plot to Moana. She is a girl on an adventure. That's it. No love interest. No, she's not chasing love. Love isn't chasing her. You know, she's just on an adventure. So I love it. But there's a part in the film that I really took a hold of, and I started thinking about. And she's sailing, and she doesn't know how to sail and all this kind of stuff. And now he's teaching her, and he says, and he teaches her how to use her hand as a sextant, and put your thumb on the horizon and align it up with stars or whatever. I can't do it, but he said something that was very profound. If you know where you are, you know who you are. Right? So we're not in this Republican Democratic thing because I believe that they are two sides of the same coin. Right? Two sides of the same coin. So that's not the environment I think we're in. I don't think people voted for who they voted for because of those allegiances. I think they voted for those folks who got to those primal needs of their fear about change and their needing to destroy or change the old tradition. Now, what do we know about context? Is context stagnant? What is context constantly doing? Constantly changing. It's constantly changing. As a relationship to that, so does culture. So context changes directly in relationship to culture directly changes as relates to context, right? So they're inextricably tied. As context changes, so does culture, right? And given where our contexts have been on the globe, our cultures are very different given the contexts that we've come on this globe, right? So when we talk about this idea of red versus blue, what I want us to think about is the context that this creates. So folks voted for an individual who they thought would slow down, stop, or reverse change. That's who they voted for. What do we know about change? It's inevitable. It is going to happen. So so for us to be effective, what do we have to figure out how to do? So we have to adapt to change. And what else do we have to do? Control the change? I don't know if I can control the change.
Accommodate to it.
Accommodate to it? Okay. So I'm called to do things that other people aren't, right? So my life is different than other people, and I don't expect you to do what I've done. So I'm going to tell you what I've done. Hold on just for a second. I'm going to tell you what I've done. So I go into, so I live in Mounds View. I don't know if anybody knows where that is. It's the northern part of Ramsey County before you get into Anoka. So for the most part, it's Anoka, right? So although I think we're on this side of 1980 and they're on the other side of, anyway, that was a joke. So change. People are afraid of change, right? Afraid of change. So I go into this bar restaurant, and long story short, I'm the only person there. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting my stuff because I have some errands to do. I'm getting my lunch and whatnot. There's a guy who's drunk and red-faced in there. And so I'm already leery because it's not a diversity mecca in Mounds View, right? You know, it's just not, there's not a whole lot of people of color. So I go in there, and the guy, kind of starts talking to me. He's slurring and all sorts of stuff. And we talk about what? When you first talk to somebody, a stranger. The weather, right? So we start talking about the weather and that kind of stuff. And then he breaks into something. And he says, I don't like niggers. So I'm stunned, just like you. I mean, just like, whoa, I was stunned. I was like, whoa. And so I had a choice. And so I did what most Minnesotans do, and I changed the subject, right? I'm not Minnesotan. You're not Minnesotan? No. So he says this, but something pricked my spirit. My spirit said, go back and address that. Don't run from that. Go address it. So I went back and I said, sir, when you use that word, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm talking about people on the system, uneducated folks, people who are living off the system, blah, 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 blah. And I said, sir, do you know any white people who fit that description? And he said, yeah. I said, how about those twins, right? So what I know is context is everything. So I'm in a place where a dude is drunk at 11 o'clock in the morning. What kind of context did I walk into? It ain't my context, right? This is this dude's place, right? So I take all that in. So we're chatting some more, and then he leans over and he says, you know what? I don't like niggers, but I like you. So now I'm kind of, but now I'm engaged with the man, right? So I look at him and said, well, what about me makes me, what do you like about me? And he said, you have a good head on your shoulders, you have a good job, you can communicate well, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, great, sir. I said, what if, sir, if all the people that you met that you think look like me were idiots, and everybody else that you haven't met yet, people you don't know, are just like me? And he looks at me and he says, I gotta pee. So he gets up and he goes to the bathroom. So I'm feeling pretty good because I'm in his space with his people, and I haven't had an altercation, but I'm getting my point across, right? So I get my stuff, and I don't even want to eat it at this point, right? Because I'm like, if it's this kind of people ain't. But I get my stuff because I paid for it, and I'm headed out the door, and guess who meets me at the door? It's the same guy. But he's got water driplets on his face. He's combed his hair over to the side, and he reaches out to me with a wet napkin. And he says, I raise chickens. If you ever need fresh eggs, give me a call, right? So I take the napkin, I go my way, he goes his way. I don't call him for chicken. But what happened for him?
He realized he changed.
He may have changed. He may have realized something. What else happened for him?
His experience changed.
His experience changed. He sobered up. His knowledge.
He had a moment of pause, I guess. He kind of shook something in him that it brought him to a place of, oh, wait a minute, I don't know. And where would that take him? Would that take him to a place of change? Would that take him to a new realization? Is hard to tell because it was that one encounter.
Yeah, and I can't tell the future. I don't know what he did with that information. I can't tell you. But what I will tell you, that my responsibility in that moment was to make him think about all that stuff he was saying, right? To make him think. Because if I can get people to think, then they can operate in a higher, in a more effective way than they do when they sit with their bigotry and their prejudice and their discriminatory behaviors, right? So I wanted to bring back our commonality as human beings. Yes.
The same happened these elections with my family and some of my friends. Like, I like you and whatever, and they were talking about Mexicans. And I'm like, I'm Mexican, but you're my favorite people, but I'm Mexican. So, but I didn't fight because a lot of people engage in fighting and just talking back or whatever. And that's what I was saying. No, if you really want to educate them, or I don't know how you say it, or make them think, you have to question about that. What do you like about Mexicans? And you like me, and I'm more Mexican than they. So.
Would you have understood if I went off on the dude? Like, how you gonna call me outside of my name? Rah, 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 rah. Would you have understood that? Would that have been right? What would that have done for him? I'd have reinforced everything, every little fantasy that he had, right? So I'm going to bring it home even closer, right? So I'm working on a case. I'm working on a case in an affluent community in the northern suburbs. And so
I come from there.
That's why I wanted to, relieve some pressure and put other pressure on other folks, right? So I'm working on this case. And so the basics of the case go like this. That a neighbor who walks his dog on a regular basis is walking past a house that he's walked past a number of times. And there are some young people doing something that he considers strange. And so he calls the police. And as a result of calling the police and the description that he gives the police, they respond with the level of intensity that he gave to the 911 caller. And so as it turns out, and the man watches this thing as the police come, 7 cars come, 3 in the front, 3 officers in the front, 4 officers in the back, guns drawn, the whole fingers on triggers, the whole 9, and these 2 17-year-old boys, one who lives in the house and one is a friend that lives in the house, were following the dad's directions of moving the patio furniture. But the neighbor thought that it was strange. Context is everything. We got people who are afraid of this stuff. So the story gets a little bit worse before it gets way better. So the officers show up and they're in full battle mode and they're yelling and screaming at the kids to do stuff. All of them are yelling and screaming at the kids. And the kids say, "Dad, we could not hear anything they were saying because there was so much noise. I don't know about any of you, but yelling isn't my thing. I'm not used to it, right? So I can't imagine the level of stress that's happening in this moment with guns drawn." They said, "Dad, the only thing we knew to do was to fall on our knees and raise our hands." So I'm doing this mediation because the dad of this family wants to know who called the police on my boys who were doing what I told them to do. And so the neighbor, they do this thing, and we're able to make this thing happen. And the dad was relentless. And so we're in these conversations, and the neighbor, we're finally able to get folks at the table to talk about this stuff. And the neighbor says, well, I did what anybody would do. I did what anybody, because it was strange. And then he says, and I'm not racist. Unprovoked, he says this, right? And so I'm smiling, and he says, I'm not racist. And I said, nobody said that you are. He said, well, I asked people if they were in the situation, would they have done a similar thing? And they said, yes. I said, did you ask people who look like you when you presented the situation, right? So there's that. So he said it was just strange. He said, I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, and I've never seen this family. So in the interview process, so the guy talks about this, and we're trying to repair harm. We're doing a restorative process. And so the father, who is white, whose wife is Panamanian, who had a son from a previous marriage with someone from Togo, who now has a dark-skinned son and 4 little mixed rainbow children that go from very light European to native brown, all a part of this family. So I asked the father, I said, Father, how long have you lived in this neighborhood? And he says, I've lived in this neighborhood for 29 years. But the neighbor has never seen this family, and he's been there for 8 years. But he's not racist. And I agreed with him. I said, sir, you're not racist.
I think the only one, maybe, that little dark skin is new to the family, maybe. That's what we haven't seen.
He hadn't seen any of them. Is it their responsibility to present themselves to him? No. The guy wasn't racist. He was arrogant. Worse than racism. Arrogant. I've been down here 100 times. I should have seen them by now. Why? I want us to be critical in our thinking, right? Because sometimes the things that we're calling racism isn't racism. The things that we think are this democratic Republican, it's not that. It's about deeper core values. And so when we talk about this context and culture, what I want us to figure out is oftentimes we can be right, but are we being effective? My goal with that drunk guy was to be effective. One of the things that surprised me in this whole thing, I wanted the father to sue this man and to sue the police department for all of this stuff. Do you know what the man said? And it humbled me. Guess what he said to this neighbor? I forgive you.
Oh, wow. What?
Oh. He said, I forgive you. He said, because if I don't forgive you, you'll walk away from this thinking I have some other motive than us having this conversation. And as a matter of fact, when you walk down our street to walk your dog again, all I ask is that you speak to my boys. The father never told the son or the wife who the person was that called. He just wanted to do this. And so as far as I know now, that the neighbor does walk his dog by, and he does wave at the house at the kids. Right? I wanted him to be right. I wanted him to get what was rightfully his. But I don't live in that community. I don't have to see that guy. I don't have to know that guy's friend, the dog walker. I don't know who his friends are. I don't know what that community is like. But that guy knew that he needed to be effective in that particular situation. So the most effective thing was to forgive that man in spite of the horrific things that he's got to now deal with in his house. His kids hate the police. And I understand why. And if they knew who that neighbor was, the father wouldn't necessarily be able to control these 17-year-old boys that might get themselves into more trouble that they couldn't get themselves out of. Right? So effectiveness. When we talk about our, so we also have to recognize that given our context, the cultures get developed. And so if I have a context that has driven me into secrecy, then I have a culture of secrecy. An example. So I'm undocumented. There's a sexual predator in my midst. Why is the predator there? Because I'm undocumented.
Because we can't go to.
Because I can't say anything.
Yeah.
I can't do anything.
Yes.
Right? So the right thing to do is to say, do this, do that. Domestic violence. There's a context that creates a particular kind of culture. Yes, he hit me this time, but next time will be different. What's the right thing for me to say? The right thing for me to tell that person is, you need to get out of that situation. You need to stop. Don't let him do that to you. Blah, 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 blah. But is that necessarily effective? So there's a term that I want you to write down somewhere, and it's not in my notes, and I probably should have done it, called harm reduction. Anyone heard of harm reduction? Familiar with that concept? Harm reduction? It stems out of kind of drug and alcohol counseling spheres. You want to say more about it for me?
So harm reduction is, for example, let's take alcoholism, for example. So somebody who is an alcoholic who drinks constantly. So if I was to come in and help this individual or provide some resources, then to a certain level of drinking to what their tolerance is, they can continue to drink on a daily basis, but then to a point where they continue to be a functioning individual. So that's kind of the reduction part in that.
And that the recovery process is on their terms, right? So we keep being resources until they're ready to make a change, right? Because what happens if you snatch somebody out of either any kind of situation, right? An abusive situation or an addictive situation? What happens when we come in and we swoop in and we take them out of that? They go back. Why?
That's what they know.
Because they want to. Right? It's providing safety, significance, and belonging. So our job oftentimes is to create the safe space for people to start making different decisions. We give them information, we give them resources. Mom, I know you're undocumented, you have a sexual predator in your community. These are some things you might want to think about. And just know, if I hear that it's gone beyond this beyond a threshold, I'm a mandated reporter. So here are tons of resources you can use to take care of this yourself. Talk to, here's a faith community, here's some community resources, here's some other people, talk to these people, because if it gets to a certain threshold, I'm a mandated reporter and you're undocumented, that's going to be a problem for you, right? Well, I don't have the skills let me pair you with somebody who can encourage you to do that kind of stuff, right? I'm in a domestic violence situation. Let me tell you, here's some resource, here's some ways. I'll keep encouraging, I'll keep checking in on you. We're going to do this harm reduction approach. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll keep giving you resources until you're ready to make that change. The same thing we need to apply to working with folks who are counter our stuff. These folks who are conservative with a small c, they want the same things we want. They want safety, significance, and belonging, but how they think they can get it is different than other people, right? Those people with the little L, they want safety, significance, and belonging. because they haven't been a part of the process, some of them want to destroy the whole process just to start something new. I'm not so interested in doing that. But it's important to understand where they're coming from too. So this idea of being right versus effective is important because context is everything. And as context changes, so does culture. And then we talk about this idea of diversity and how have we defined diversity? Commonalities and differences, right? I thought it was interesting that the officer talked about some things that many of us, that she may be on a different side of things than we are, but we need to hear that voice so that we know how to work with those folks, right? So she talked a lot about equality. Did anybody pick that up? That we should treat everybody the same, everybody fairly. Why might she have that perspective? Why might that be a perspective that an officer of the law has?
Because there's like protocols to follow.
Yeah. So she's working off of statutes and protocols and processes that are very linear, right? Because oftentimes they don't have time to make the differentiations between individuals and human stuff. So they just come in and bam, this is what we do. However, in her practice, what was she exhibiting? Equity. Right? More, Joe.
I thought it was interesting because she came in and it sounded like she had a lot of sort of passion about how she approached her position in the school, and she really was approaching it as building relationships and community policing, and but then a question came up about your job description or your training or whatever it might be, and you can see her sort of revert to the towing the line. This is my position, and I'll waver from that, and that's obviously your professional training, right?
Yeah. Right. So and I would say that both of these are related, and then too often we don't talk about them in concert. We talk about them inclusive of one another. I would say that equality is probably the first step, but we move to equity when we give people what they need. Right? So first, we need to make sure that we have the lights are on for who? Everybody, right? The lights are on for everybody, but some of us still need glasses, right? So we have to talk about these things in concert. And then lastly, this idea of inclusion, and I want to shift the paradigm on that as well, because people have seen this, I think I'm going to do a poor job, but bear with me. Right, and then there's the fence or however it goes, right? So people on the boxes and the fence, and you've seen those pictures, right?
Yeah.
I have a problem with those pictures. And what do you think the problem is that I have with the pictures? It's a great example, yes.
I can give you my problem.
Yeah.
They are outside of the stadium.
They're outside of the stadium, right? So the problem isn't the resources, it's not the boxes, it's not the people, it's the artificial barrier that we've created to prevent people from having access. So it's the fence. So we spend all this time, oftentimes, talking about equity and equality and making sure we give people stuff, when in fact, if we just tear down the fences, we don't need any of that stuff. Or those stuff, that stuff becomes added to that. So what are those artificial barriers that we're creating? So when we talk about inclusion, people get confused. They think we have to do something more. I'm not interested in doing anything more. I don't know about you, but I'm sort of kind of lazy, actually. I don't like doing extra. Although people say I do extra, but that's a whole other thing, right? You're doing the most. But inclusion is actually tearing down barriers that prevent us from being effective, right? So an example from Hennepin County. So I was working on a group project that we're trying to, anybody familiar with a bench warrant? All right. So a bench, what is a bench warrant, Joe?
you got outstanding tickets and you haven't paid them, and you get stopped by a police officer, they'll bring you in.
Yeah. So it's like this floating warrant kind of thing, right? So outstanding tickets can get that. A request to come to court and you don't come can get you a bench warrant. It's almost for like non-violent. It's a warrant for like non-violent stuff, right? So in Hennepin County, this was the process. So officers would engage with kids who were truant and truancy is an interesting thing because it's not just the timeline, but it's like not being in spaces that you're not supposed to be in, right? So, and whatever that means, right? So officers were writing these kids tickets, and who do you think they were giving the tickets to?
Yes.
The kids, right? So they're writing tickets, and they're giving the tickets to the kids. Now, what are the kids supposed to do? They're supposed to take it home and give it to mom and dad. What do you think kids were doing?
Throwing it away.
Throwing them away, right? I'm like, what is this, right? It's already, I'm being hassled by a cop anyway. I don't, and now I got to be hassled by my mom and dad. I'm not giving it to my mom and dad. So what was the county's response to that? So they would mail a court appearance.
Yeah.
So I know that I threw away a ticket, or I forgot that I threw away a ticket, and now there's something from Hennepin County with my name and my parents' name attached, or I have a suspicion of what this is. What am I going to do with that? I'm going to throw it away. So now the kid got a ticket, supposed to show up in court because they sent a letter. Parents don't know the letter's there. The kid now has what? A bench warrant. So now the kid gets caught doing something else. And now where does the kid go because he's got a bench warrant? He goes right to jail or juvenile detention, right? So all this thing gets escalated. So guess what Hennepin County decided to do? So they still, sometimes they still give the kid the ticket. So sometimes they take them to the link program. They also started calling the parents. Oh, imagine that. And what do you think happened to the bench warrants? Right? So those personal touches are important things. So this idea of inclusion, it's not necessarily doing extra stuff, but how do we tear down artificial barriers that prevent us from being effective? So there's that. She talked a little bit about, you asked a question about implicit bias. What is implicit bias? Anyone ever?
Yeah, just like it could be like the automatic like stereotypes. You don't even know it's there. It's just like maybe it's a feeling, seeing.
Assumption.
It's an assumption. You don't even know that it's.
Not even. It's not even that you don't even have to acknowledge that it's.
So wait a minute. So how do you have something you don't know that you have?
Well, exactly when you are like sitting in Mountain View, whatever place that drunk man came to you, his assumption he was like talking to you because you are a black man, and he assumed that black people are living on the expenses of the government.
Yeah.
See the assumption.
Okay, so that is assumption. That's great. That's assumption. But how is implicit bias different? Because they use different words. They don't just say
the IQ. Like we're talking about the IQ is their implicit bias for all the cultures.
Okay, so implicit. An example of implicit bias could be IQ, right?
So it's a subconscious function of your brain to make quick judgments as to what you are seeing and make a reactionary emotional response to it. That you might not be aware of how you are filtering the person or the information you're seeing, but it's your response or your instant judgment of this.
Stereotypes can be a result of implicit bias.
So stereotypes can be a result of implicit bias. I forgot what stereotypes were, but right? It could be a version of that. What were we going to say?
You get like a judgment might hinder, like for example, a police officer might judge a black man while driving, like when he's driving, So there is like, they get stopped more frequent. And then not because, they are doing violations, but there is some subconscious in the police officers that, well, they are, there's a trouble here. So subconscious.
So subconscious. Go ahead.
Well, actually, it's you have stereotypes and everything that you've heard so much, and for them to be true, they become part of your subconscious. And then they're in your subconscious, and this is the way you weigh things out subconsciously, and then it manifests itself in the conscious.
So one of the things I thought was interesting. So I asked the guy. So I asked the guy who was in that mediation where the kids got the guns drawn on them, right? So I know that when I was a kid, and it's a long time ago, right? Granted, and it was in a different kind of community and that kind of stuff. I would be doing stuff. It didn't matter what it was. I could just be doing stuff either in my yard or in the neighborhood or whatever. And if an old person saw me and they thought it looked strange, do you know what they would do? They said, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" And I say, "My dad told me to da da da." And they go, "Oh, okay." And they go about their business, right? So I asked the guy, I said, why didn't you just ask him? Right? Before you call the police, why didn't you just ask him? And guess what came up? All his implicit bias. He said, well, I didn't know if they would have a gun. Okay, it's 11:30 in the day. Why would you think they would have a gun? Oh, because 5 years ago somebody got robbed, and okay, so 5 years ago. And I said, and what did you think was going to happen when the police showed up with the description that you gave? He said, well, I guess I just thought they would talk to them. I said, all of those things that you're having, those are fantasies in your head, right? So implicit bias are those things that we may not be aware of, but we're certainly accountable to. We talk about blind spots, right? In that pie of all human knowledge. Implicit bias is one of those things that dwells in that blind spot space, right? But here is the problem with blind spots. Here is the problem, particularly, and we like to use that. And know there's a big push in criminal justice to talk about implicit bias and all this kind of stuff. But I think implicit bias is hooey. I think it's hooey. What that means is, I think it is an excuse.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say.
It is an excuse for something else, right? I think it's an excuse. And what is an excuse for? Do we have it? Yes, I believe that we have it. There are tons of things that I am not aware of. As a man, there are things that as a man, I will never understand or know about what it means to be a woman, right? So I have a bias there. I mean, I have a blind spot there. There's just stuff I won't know. I do know what it means to be human, so I can meet you there. But here's the thing. We all have these fears. We all have these other things, but we don't let them control our behavior. So anytime you hear someone talk about implicit bias, they have to follow that implicit bias with cognitive control. How many people are afraid of spiders? Snakes? Oh, yeah. All right, cool. So you're in a business meeting. This meeting goes well. You'll get $2 million. Right? Just $2 million. They'll write you a check right after the business meeting for $2 million. A snake comes in the room or a spider comes in the room. What do?
You run. Exactly. You forget about the money.
I ain't forgetting about no $2 million. That snake, right? I'm gonna think about how to put a barrier between me and the snake. I'm gonna get I just like to stand right now. I'm gonna figure out all this kind of stuff because I want to get that $2 million, right? And the snake is not gonna stop me. So we do create. We become critical thinkers about how to solve problems, even when those things are fearful. And it's that cognitive control that I want to focus on. Cognitive control in the midst of all of these things being fears or things that we don't that we're afraid of, or we don't know but how do we develop cognitive control, right? We used to do high ropes courses at the high school that I was in. And there were tons of students who were afraid to do the high ropes course. But how do we get them to overcome their fear? First, they wanted to do it. Secondly, we put them on low ropes courses first, right? So put your little zip line on the thing, and you walk across the thing with the little harness and the rope, and they got comfortable with that. And then we could take them up on the high ones, and they could do the whole, still afraid, but they had cognitive control. They can control their fears. They can control their anxiety. And so that becomes important to understand that implicit bias alone is inadequate for us to talk about, because there's responsibility with those things, right? Your blind spot in your car, you may not necessarily know about it or think to look for it, but you are responsible for it, right? So if you hit somebody because of your blind spot, or you crash into something, who's the insurance company going to look for? You, right? So that's important. So implicit bias and cognitive control. There was something else I wrote up here. Oh, and again, just thinking about what's wrong with you versus what has happened to you. So what I'd like to do now is I want to play a game with you all, and it's oh yeah, no, yeah, we'll do that, and then we'll do the other thing. So I've been doing a lot of talking. Any questions, comments, observations at this point? No? Okay. Yes.
Question, or I don't know. The officer said something about they want to be treated the same thing.
Yep.
With the families that I work with, one of the resources that we have are the Yale classes that they need. They don't like them. They don't like to be different.
Yeah.
They don't like to go out of the classroom.
Yeah.
How to give them the resources they need without making them feel different, because they have different needs or whatever. How can we help? Because and they will be sometimes aggressive to the young teachers. Like usually they are very open and understanding about the different cultures or whatever, but they don't like to feel different.
Yeah.
Even I work for community education, and they were forcing maybe doing programs with different languages. But my concern is the same. They want to belong. They want to fit in. Yep. And one of my goals is promote this, because I think community education activities are great for our kids to integrate, to have something in common, to participate in the community or whatever. And it's part of that. So giving them these programs in their own language make them different. And again, we're separated.
Yeah. So in one respect, the future will take care of that, right? I believe in the future, ELL will be regular. Like that, it'll just be a course just like any other. Until that happens, one of the things that we have to do is normalize in our school buildings those activities. And so there is also something in the school environment that makes them feel like this is a lesser than thing. I'm sorry.
They try to encourage that being bilingual or having is something extra. I mean, it's an asset. It's something positive.
So here's one for you, right? So we used to do morning announcements in school, and I was one of those announcers, right? So this is, Andre Cohen and, Cougar Radio or something, right? And now they do videos, right? Morning shows and that kind of stuff. Are those bilingual?
No.
Are they trilingual? I mean, are they trying to do some languages? So it's those kinds of things that take the side project and make it mainstream, right? So are there things that other folks need to learn too? Right? So I work for the I not work for them. I'm on the board of the Boy Scouts, right? People have opinions about the Boy Scouts, and they are who they are. And I'm there because of all this stuff that's on this board. So they have these specialized districts that are for African American, for Hmong, for Latinx, for there's another group. I'm trying to get them to have a native. It just seems right. I don't know why. It just seems
They
right.
need it too.
Right. So at any rate, so they have these specialized things. What I'm trying to push them to do is to continue to have those things because there's people who need that. But what are the rest of the Scouts doing to integrate folks from these special populations into their regular thing? So part of it might be, and I think Beth hit it best. What would happen if in a classroom, the teacher said, let's look at this particular curriculum piece from a multicultural perspective. So from your family of origin, oh, this is another thing I wanted to write down. Write this down, funds of knowledge. And it's directly related to this IQ thing, right? So from your perspective, encouraging teachers, if you have ELL students, how do you start bringing those ELL lessons into your classroom so that it becomes an enriching place?
And we do that, and it's like the perfect environment, and sometimes the teacher comes to the classroom and co-teach. So and that is very nice. But some cases, especially we don't have funds.
Yeah.
So we have to work with that too.
Yeah.
And sometimes teachers have to follow their curriculum.
Yeah.
And they have standards to reach or whatever. And we have EL students that really need support.
Yeah.
It's not just about reaching the class. It's more, it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
So taking that. But I noticed your reaction when she said, we need to we have the same expectation. How do you deal with that? Of course, you cannot have the same expectation, but at the same time, you want to expect the same, and they want it to be expected the same. So how do you bridge that, or how do you deal with that?
So first,
should we have the same expectations?
So how have you dealt with that? So I'm going to put that back to you. Yes.
No, I had a question, but
okay.
Yeah, let's answer.
How have you met with? This is the standard for all students, but my students might need or able to do all over the board. Yes.
Well, I'm gonna share my personal experience regarding your question. When I came to this country, I didn't speak any English. Then years later, I got married. I have a kid, and obviously, as Spanish-speaking family, we struggle a lot with the ELPs. Every conference, every meeting was about your child is learning the alphabet, he's struggling in reading, blah, blah, blah. Right.
That's a language.
So as a Spanish-speaking parent, I heard that many, many times. What I needed to hear is this is how you can help them. But as a Spanish-speaking mom, how can I teach my kid phonics and English, right? So they said, well, he might need special education or a special program. And I said, I don't think there's a problem with him. I don't see a problem with him. He's a normal kid. He's learning. He's just learning a second language, right? So what I did is I asked the teacher, please be patient with this kid. Please be patient. He's going to get there. So I started to, we needed time, right? So I started to learn the language as well. I started to educate myself, and in time, I learned that sometimes we set the same expectations. I said, teacher, thank you for that. Thank you for pushing me, but my kid is gonna get there. Don't worry about it. he's gonna get there. So we hold the same expectations, but not everybody has to get there at the same time. So now my kid is in 7th grade, and I'm very proud of him because he got 2 awards in his graduation for academic achievement. So they just need time.
I want somebody write that down. They will get there, but not all at the same time, right? Get there, but not at the same
And
time.
that's part of the quality. You know, I think when they are younger, and they will get there, my concern is that, especially the middle school, that they need to belong.
Yeah.
That they are in this very,
Believe me, they'll get there. I'm about to graduate from college. I do not speak English at all. They will get there.
So the problem is keeping them motivated enough to get right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said just keeping them together.
It doesn't, sorry, I just wanted to give an example of the opposite. It doesn't matter if they don't speak the language. I'm just coming from an opposite way because my kids go to Spanish immersion. And I know, well, I mean, I can help them because of the Spanish, but I know parents that send their kids to Spanish immersion that don't know Spanish, but their kids are there learning the Spanish language. And like you say, they will get there. And they can't help them many times because they don't speak the language, but the kids, with time, you know, get to learning the second language.
Yeah, but more than the second language, I don't know if you understood my question. Some is giving them the resources different from others that they need because they are English learners or because they are minorities or whatever, and making them feel different and don't having the same expectations.
Yeah.
Can I?
It's more profound than just learning the language or getting the academic. You know, it's more like a belonging.
But what I failed to do was print out the 40 developmental assets, right? I would encourage you to look at those documents from the Search Institute. And I can't say, I don't know if they've been culturally normed, so I don't know if they've been culturally normed or not. But I do know for me, working with my young people, looking at that list of things that I can be doing both internally and externally has been really helpful in making sure that I'm able to, my biggest thing when I taught middle school was, I knew that they would learn, but I wanted to make sure that they were alive long enough to be able to get to learn, right? So I was teaching lots of skills on how to keep yourself safe and keep yourself intact, both physically and mentally, how not to get into, you know, situations that you're not mature enough to work yourself out of. And so part of that for me was looking at those developmental assets. One thing I did want to just say is that funds of knowledge is directly related to this IQ for what? So I wanted to draw that line. Funds of knowledge is all the stuff we know at home that may not necessarily be recognized in the school setting. But students know great stuff. They come with a wealth of knowledge. They are not empty vessels to be filled with our knowledge. And so the funds of knowledge, if we can find out what is going on, what they do well at home, that in fact may be some of those things that we can bring into the classroom to help stuff like this. For example, not that sports has to be everything, but soccer outside of the United States is a universal thing. So if I can find kids that are, you know, that may be failing in all this other stuff, and I find out they play soccer, we can get them all playing soccer, and that can be the thing that draws them in.
And there are kids that I know that maybe academically won't be able to succeed, but in a sport, or as a coach, or as an artist, they will have a path.
And
Yes.
I do want to add to that, and once again, as you were saying, it's a matter of time. I personally, when I was brought here, I always say it that way because I didn't have a say. I was brought here when I was 12 years old. There was a lot of crying. I was very stressed. I was upset with my parents. And it got to the point, the first day of school, anything that could have gone wrong, went wrong. I got lost. I couldn't find me until 7 p.m. There were no cell phones that I would have had. I just felt miserable. I remember my first day I came back home, but around around 8 p.m., threw my backpack, and I told right straight to my parents, I used to be the child that in Mexico I was in so many activities, and education-wise I was very active. Coming here, I said to my parents, why you brought me here? I didn't ask to be here. I don't want to be here. I said, you guys cut my wings, and I still relate back to that feeling and anger that I have and the sentiments that come along with that. And I said, you cut my wings. Because I went and asked the gym teacher that I wanted to be in the volleyball team because I used to be in Mexico. That response was, you will not be able to follow directions. I cried because I said, the rules for volleyball are the same here or in Mexico or whatever. I was involved in the choir. I want to be in the choir. No, because you have an accent. Okay. Then I went, can I be the student assistant for the Spanish teacher? No, because you're fluent. I couldn't participate in anything. But then we came to Jesus with a talk with my parents. And my mom said after a year, because at that point, I thought myself, fine, I can't do anything. I tried to do in photography, and that was the only thing because I didn't have the talk. And that was what actually got me into something. The teachers were amazing, some of them, but not the ones that had nothing to do with the ESL program. Other than that, the teachers had no idea who the student was or what was the history or anything, because they will not even try to interact with you. But the teachers in the ESL, they did. And they were the ones that made the difference and gave me hope. Now, my mom said after a year, this is what we're gonna do. You're already here. And I see that you're not doing anything. I see you left yourself and you cried. We're not going back. We're here to stay. So you need to embrace the culture. You need to learn new things. We're gonna embrace because we're here. But don't forget where you came from, because that will define who you are. And I still that. It's within me, and I still teach that to my children. And after 2 years and 3 years process, I realized I started opening up more myself. My mom took the initiative of going to activities, even though we didn't speak the language, but try to get immersed into that. And she said it will get easier. Give it time. It will get easier. After 3 years, it's just like things change. It's just because you're learning. And a lot of our students are dealing with that, mostly the ones that were not born here versus the ones that were born here, because they're starting to pick up the language at an early age, but they will get there. They will get there.
Yeah,
I understand there are unique cases and amazing, and when you have a family who supports you. But the guys that concern me are the ones that they don't have that.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't graduate them. That's what our grades are bad, because sometimes time is not enough.
Okay, I work at middle. And I was also in my 6th grade year. So, and I'm very real with my students because they feel like outsiders, and I'm like, you're right, it sucks. I hated it too. And I feel different, and I don't want to be here. And that's it. So I tell them, so get out. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, start reading. Why aren't you reading? And they're like, oh, I don't want to read. Call parents up. She or he needs to read. And they're like, okay. And then I know at home, because I work with these parents, like, I'll just disclose their name. Like, Mariela, like, go read. And like, I come up, did she read? I don't know. She was on her iPad. She went to her room. I know she's reading. But she's a single mom. She's working. She physically cannot be there. So I'm the adult in her life. I check in, I call her, and I find other adults in her community, in her church community, that I've developed those relationships. So if it takes a village to raise a child. So it's not just my responsibility. It's not just moms.
Because sometimes parents are not in the
Yeah, we do those home visits. And I tell them about these conversations. I'm like, okay, like, we got everybody in, and it's like we have newcomers from Colombia, just different ones who used to be lawyers, and then all of a sudden they can't practice in this country. It's a completely different system, or they're coming from it's just different. And so it's like helping them recognize where they're coming from, who they are, where they are now, like what's their new context, how they can survive, giving them those tools, and still having those high expectations, but like you were saying yesterday, we still have to give them those resources, those tools, and I'm still holding them accountable. We have an immersion school within our our middle school, which is very different. And I'm like, they speak Spanish. Do you guys see how they're being glorified and stuff because they speak 2 languages? Yeah. I'm like, it's the same thing. We're just trying to you speak English fluently. I know. You don't even have an accent. It's true. But there's some readings and there's some stuff, and I'm going to teach you studies. Yeah.
That's a bench language.
Yeah.
She's not about
Right.
speaking
And
it.
so then I have those conversations with them, but it's being very transparent, real, and saying, like, you're going to get out. You know, and what I see, I don't have to encourage them so much because all of a sudden they rise up themselves and start encouraging each other. And even with the EL teacher, we're like, all right, we're gonna get you guys out of here. We become allies. And then I don't know what it is at your school, but I talk to my EL coordinator of the district. I tell them where they're coming from, and they start thinking, okay, how can we make this different? What is it working? Okay, this isn't working. Let's get rid of this because we're not meeting those needs. But it's being very authentic and having those conversations about context and how kids are coming from. So yeah, encourage them. Share their growth. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Cool. Now, I do want to go. I want to rewind way back because you did have a question.
Yeah. So as professional educators or paraprofessionals, a lot of our individuals in here are paraprofessionals, along with professionals who are the educators as well. And I think you brought up a good question of the language barrier and how, the English is the dominant language. But what about the individuals that are struggling with the academic piece, which is the language, with an IEP? So where we do have students who are struggling with the language, and that becomes a barrier, but now they're academically behind. And we're also trying to hold them accountable to meet all these standardized testing scores. So because they're not meeting standards or meeting these test scores, these tough conversations that I have with my parents are, sorry, but we have to hold your student back. And the parents are kind of going back to what you said, and what you said too is kind of having this of, no, let's challenge them, let's have them go and, we'll challenge them and we'll have them go to the next grade level. And I know that they will do it. I know coming from a parent standpoint, I totally understand. But those standards really do restrict them because now the professionals are saying, I understand, mom and dad, you guys want to have Haku move on to the next grade, but academically we can't because they are academically on IEP and they're not meeting those goals and those standards. Now, as a professional and a paraprofessional, what do we end up doing?
So I can speak to that. So I do a lot of PD for my staff around this area, and I think Beverly spoke to it actually in her piece, that oftentimes our ELL population and our SPED population are looked at very similarly.
Yes, they do.
Right? And so while I don't believe in necessarily holding students back, I think the conversation around scaffolding really comes in here. Differentiation really comes in here. So when we talk about what type of scaffolds mean, what boxes need to be placed in the classroom so that they can engage at the table with other students. Because this conversation is not just about students who, I think it's a very specific and important conversation to have about ELL students in that context. And I also think this conversation is happening about students who speak English as their first language and who are not able to meet the standards, right? Yeah. And so in that way, do we hold everyone back because they can't meet the standards? Or do we figure out that teachers need to be trained to teach the students who are in front of them, right? Right. So if the issue is that they cannot teach the students who are in front of them, there's something not happening where their delivery or whatever's happening in the classroom is not, the students are not learning, or the students are not growing or developing, or the students are not asking the questions that they need or feeling comfortable and safe to say, can you explain it a different way? I'm not getting it, right? There's something happening where all year the exchange has not happened well, right? I think that's a conversation about teacher development and then high expectations, higher expectations for teachers, because there should be more of there should be a smaller population of students who are struggling to succeed, and there should be a greater number of students in the classroom who are able to, no matter their first language, no matter their ability levels, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the conversation around scaffolding comes in. This is what we can do in our sites, is to remind our teams that we need to look at some new relevant ways of making education, accessible to students in the classroom. Here's some ways you can scaffold that learning. Here are these different I can statements that relate to something that they, believe in already, or, here's some things you've sat in their homes at a home visit and you see there's a trend or a theme or a pattern of value. So maybe we include that into the reading lesson or the text that we're choosing, and whatever. So, and not on a surface level only, but I'm saying those are ways to begin at my site, scaffolding and differentiating the learning so that every student has an opportunity to access the education. And then you can say the 2 or 3 students in the classroom who are like, okay, you need something different. Maybe we do need to bring you to our team, our SAT team, or, to talk about what other barriers are happening for you, I think.
Cool, yes.
So, just when the officer was talking about the equality treatment and stuff.
Yeah.
I struggle with treating the potential of a child. To me, I felt like that's where she was going, that I want every child to have, to believe that I believe in them. Where they get on the standardized testing level might not match what I believe that I want them to do. And not to make, like, the only way I can kind of wrap my head around this is just an example of something that I sat in one year, a long time ago. A group of people deciding or trying to figure out how best to provide access to programs to a group of students of color. And many people were making, well, they're not eating breakfast in the morning, so they're just never going to be able to do this. And, they stayed up late because they had to take care of their brothers and sisters, so they're just never going to be able to do this. Right? And a group of moms marched in and sat down to join the group, and, everybody I knew around the table except for the group of moms, and I didn't know they were moms. Just a group of women came in. And, I thought, well, who are you people? What are you doing here? And they commanded a great presence. And they started to talk about their children. And after they listened to this group talking about what we felt was really what they needed. And this one particular mom stood up and she said, do not expect any less of my child. I don't want you to make excuses for them. I want you to believe in them the same as you believe in this child, the same as you believe in this child. They definitely have these other things going on. We're definitely in a different place. We've got a whole different set of things happening. But I want you to believe in my child the same as you believe in the other child. So when I hear people talking about, when I talk about equality, that's where I'm coming from. That I don't necessarily believe that every child, the expectations that everybody needs to be at this standardized testing level, because I know not everybody's going to get there. But I want this child, no matter where that child is at, to believe that I think that child can get there. And that I don't expect anything less, because I think you can't speak English, so I don't expect you to, I just don't expect you to learn that. I do. I expect you to do that because I want you to, and I want to help you do that. But like you said the other day, I cannot create an expectation unless I'm going to give a resource. And that's where I feel we fall short, is that I want to make an expectation that I want you to be the best that you can, and not be whatever you want, but be what you set your mind to.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this equality, right, I want everybody to have access to their safety, significance, and belonging, period. I want that for everybody. But I also recognize that how people get that safety, significance, and belonging is going to be very different, right? So no, I have the same expectations of success and love and wholeness for all of my students. But I also know that if there is a difference between being an immigrant and a refugee, that war-torn aspect, to try to expect the exact same kinds of things is going to be different. And so, no, I can have those high expectations, and I'm feeling.
But are we looking? I like this. I feel
Yep,
like I'm
yep.
like this right now. That I'm just. I don't know why I'm not sure with that. I just.
So okay, so let me. So
I don't.
There's a group of
feel
people.
like some expectations are in a bad way. Like, I expect you to score, 500 on the SAT test or whatever. And half the people are never going to be able to do that. Yeah, but I don't really expect that.
So here's I'm going to toss this big elephant in the room, right? So, what page? What?
3.4.
3.4.
High expectations are unrealistic goals.
Which book?
Yeah. A3.4.
I thought maybe my high expectation is that I want you to know that
I don't pity you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, maybe that's where I'm going. That I understand your challenges. I get that.
Yeah.
But I also know that you have strength to do what you want to do.
Yes.
And I think the people in my world want to make excuses. They want to say,
look at it as almost like a disability because of
yes, and that, we can't possibly expect that. Yes, we can.
Yes, definitely.
And stop.
Yes.
Because I'm in a very different world.
That's kind of that missionary mentality, right?
Yeah.
So it's the reverse of the savior syndrome, in that they can't do for them. I mean, I gave you these books for a reason, right? So if you really think about it, like on page 63, this is what we're talking about, right? This idea of doing for or with versus to do, to ignore, that's what we're talking about, right? So high expectations, but high support.
Empowerment.
Right? So you can use empowerment, you can use whatever. So just remember, I gave you these books for a reason. I selected these things because I thought it would be helpful. So when you read it, pass it on. But yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Because that's the inverse of the effects of the savior syndrome kind of thing.
And it is just like the way we treat our own children. You want them to succeed. They're gonna have challenges. But you have to also teach them, because you don't want your child to fall behind, or what other challenges are they gonna have when they're adults? If there's gonna be a lot of challenges and bridges that they're gonna find themselves through, And are you gonna tell them, okay, I'm not gonna help you?
Yeah.
Or what you're gonna deal with?
I still
Here's the
think that,
matter.
yep, I think that chart it can be applied to not just restorative justice, but to other things as well.
Just one comment. I think I'm hearing a lot of like us is our responsibility as a school, but we also have to make our parents accountable.
Yeah.
We gotta teach them. You know what? In parent-teacher conference, my parent-teacher conference, I teach this stuff. You tell them what needs to do, and they're gonna do it. Now, there's an exception to the rules. We have some, but they want the best. But we're not making them accountable. They trust in the child.
Yeah,
so
but the other thing,
we gotta do what.
But with that though is we also have to recognize our Western way of looking at things and the rest of our way of looking at things, because Western world would say parents are responsible, right? When I was growing up, everybody around me was responsible, right? Exactly. Because they took the responsibility. I lived in a multi-generational household. My great-grandfather lived with us. He was accountable. My neighbor, was accountable, blah, blah, blah. My church was accountable. So we are putting a lot of families are the places that we should go, but those families are also in a context. And if they're not in a context, that could be a clue as to why things are so tough, right? So, yes, ma'am.
I just want to add to what you said about holding parents accountable. I think that's true, but I also feel like it's hard for the parents sometimes to participate in stuff and be able to help their child if they don't have the tools.
Yeah.
So one example. So this is my first year in this position, but I was invited to go to a fire class. I don't remember what that is, but it was really good, and the facilitator was Spanish speaking, so mostly it was just moms, so she had maybe 4 or 5 moms there, and the topic for that day when I went was about grade point average and stuff like that, and from what I was listening to, the parents were like, what? Like, this is a determining factor for my child to be able to get scholarships for all these other things. Like, the parents were shocked because they didn't know. Like, there was no one there that took the time to explain to them that this was going to be a determining factor for things. So if the parents don't have someone help them with those tools, the parents might be fools.
Yeah. So no, I agree with you, and I agree with you, and I think context is important. And so if we're not even giving parents the tools or connecting with resources, how can we hold them accountable, right?
Yes,
it's like having, we talk about the.
And again, she said that sometimes you give the tools, and it is very true. They have to bring the bread. Then we do extracurricular activities where we do bring tutors in. Then there is.
It has happened to me.
Yeah.
It has
So, yes.
We are talking about different settings, I think.
Yes. Yeah, we are.
In elementary level, it's easy to give them tools. I have students like yours. How do you give tools to a parent to help in the U.S. government class? As a parent, how can you help them? How do you put that student that doesn't speak any English in that class with U.S. history, physics? How do you call the parent and ask him, hey, you need to help your kid to study what? How do you help these parents to help in this class?
The routine. Create those routines. You need 30 minutes to do it. Nowadays, I don't know, a lot of teachers are given the electronics. They don't have to tell them like 2 + 2. Just, you need 20 minutes of reading.
Yeah, but maybe just students don't read.
Yeah, and
you choose history.
Yeah,
they don't know how to read English.
Yeah. So thank you for making that differentiation, because that is important.
Different tools that you are using. For example, if students are learning, my students that are newcomers are learning English and they're taking these history classes where it's completely different than what they've learned. We have
books that are kids normally get, but these EO students get a different book, a smaller version.
That's what we're looking for.
A smaller version
Yeah.
that goes directly to the point of what they are learning. And then the teacher, so this is modified work. The teacher will say, okay, the students are doing this project, you're gonna have A, B through C, A, B, and C, and D, right? Well, I need you to only do A and B, meaning that I just want you to focus on what is that we are learning. I just want you to focus on that and just explain it to me in your own words. You give it to me in a presentation for myself, just to me, or we can partner you with somebody that speaks English, and then you say it in your language, and they will interpret for you. So there's different, those kind of tools, and all of that is what your email is, teacher is supposed to be giving it to you, not you figuring it out, because that's their role.
I would say too that, different districts and different teachers are more experienced or less experienced, or have more resources or less resources in history with differentiation, right? Like we said. There may be some mainstream teachers who have very little, if zero, experience in how to sort of differentiate a lesson plan for a EL learner in the classroom. So again, it's context and it's knowing that individual student and then understanding, the teacher, again, that might be a conversation with administration that, hey, I'm seeing some gaps here.
My mom and my dad didn't know anything.
Patricia, can you call them and explain about the staff?
That's important, because my dad from very young said, when you get home from homework, then you eat homework, then you can do whatever you want. And it's that routine that as I got older, I no longer had to be told that, because it was automatically already told to me, and I automatically did it. So my mom and my dad did not sit with me to do my project. My mom and dad did not sit with me to read an English book because they don't know how to. But they told me, sit in the table where I'm watching you.
Yeah, but I didn't know about those.
I don't know that.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Because I'm not in public, we don't have the.
Yeah, I have the regular.
All right. We can go all day, we can go all the time. I'd like to just stop us right here because it's hot. I gotta figure out why it's hot. And I just have to call the people because they gave me a whole tray of pork. And I did not ask for a tray of pork. So we got to figure that out, but I do have chicken tacos. So Taco Cat will have a conversation. I try to support the people, that kind of thing. So it is lunchtime. Want to make sure that you get your lunchtime. We'll pick up some of the stuff. But a number of the things that we're wrestling with are right in the book. And SEMA has some really good tools right in there. So we'll get into that in just a second. It's probably my wife calling, to complain about Taco Cat. So the way I think this works is that there are tortillas here, there are beans here, there's chicken here, and then there are the toppings there. If you would like, they're not going to take it back, but they're going to give me my money back. If you like pork, please do so. But it was not in my plan to do that. And there are chips there, and I'll get water and stuff out.
Can we invite folks who do not eat pork to grab first, so they can have that chicken option first?
Yes.
Is it enough chicken to?
Yeah. So if you thank you, that was what wisdom. So if you'd like to make a plate now for later, please go first. And those people who would like to eat pork or do eat pork, if you could have more of that than you would chicken, that would be great. So if there's anybody who'd like to make who doesn't eat pork, they'd like to make their plate first, do that. And those who do or can eat pork, if you can do that secondly. So lunch is served. I also have cookies, so I'll get cookies as well. And we'll get back together at 12:45. All right? Oh, well. If anyone wants to make a plate for later, I have Ziploc bags.
Desde el quinto grado, yo no puedo. I can't help them. Even in something like all that I can't.